Amelia Earhart blazed a trail across the sky and left a comet tale of awe and inspiration. Her signature move? Oh, just casually zipping across the Atlantic Ocean, all alone, a feat only a person with nerves of steel could pull off. And if that wasn't enough, she whipped out another first, the inaugural solo flight from tropical Hawaii to the mainland US. However, one day, Amelia vanished during an audacious attempt to circle the entire globe in her trusty plane. Despite extensive searches, neither she nor her aircraft were ever found. Amelia's vanishing act turned into one of the most enduring whodunits of the 20th century. Now, let me tell you a bit more about the hero of our story. For starters, she came from the picturesque Kansas town of Atchison, but what made her truly special from a young age was the fact that she liked to break social molds. She liked to play basketball and tinker with cars. In between her adrenaline-filled exploits, Amelia served as a nurse's aide in Toronto. There, she started hanging around local airfields, probably trying to pick up some flying tips from the local pilots. Returning to the US, Amelia dipped her toes in pre-med at Columbia University, but traded her textbooks for a pilot's jacket after a thrilling airplane ride with a veteran pilot in 1920. That was the hook. Amelia became irreversibly smitten with the sky. Learning to fly was no small feat, but Amelia was up for the challenge. She enrolled for flying lessons soon after. To fund her high-flying dreams, Amelia got down to earth, slogging away as an administrative clerk in the city of Los Angeles. After scrimping and saving, she finally bought her own set of wings, a bright yellow plane, which she lovingly dubbed the Canary. After her flight test in 1921, she managed to snatch her first flight exhibition, wowing the crowds in Pasadena, California. When it came to setting records, Amelia was a master. She flew solo at amazing heights, a feat no woman had achieved before at that time. Next, she made a solo transatlantic flight, making landfall in a cow field in Northern Ireland. Despite her individual success, Amelia wasn't one to hog the limelight. She actively worked to bring more women into aviation. For this, she co-founded an organization dedicated to the promotion of female pilots. Today, this group still champions women in aviation across 44 countries. By 1937, Amelia was itching for another adventure. She planned a spectacular eastbound flight around the world, aiming to be the first pilot to pull off this celestial showstopper. Taking off from Oakland, California, she aimed to encircle the globe like a hawk circling its prey. This time she had a sidekick, a navigator named Fred Noonan. The duo blazed a trail from Miami to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, then to India and Southeast Asia. A tragedy struck. Amelia and Fred never made it to one of their refueling stops at Howland Island. Their last radio contact with the U.S. Coast Guard was enigmatic, to say the least. After U.S. officials greenlit a massive search, the world waited. Sadly, after 2 weeks of suspense, Amelia and Fred were declared lost at sea. Ever since, countless theories have bubbled up about their fate. The official verdict is that the pair were lost in the Pacific Ocean. This theory suggests they finished up all their fuel while searching for Howland Island and plunged into the vast ocean. Over the years, various well-equipped expeditions have tried to locate the wreckage near Howland, but alas, the ocean isn't spilling the beans. There's another intriguing theory, the Gardner Island hypothesis. Some folks reckon Amelia and Fred landed on Gardner Island, now named Nikumaroro, in the Republic of Kiribati, which was a long distance off their course. Though search planes saw signs of recent activity on the island a week after Amelia's disappearance, they found no trace of the plane. This theory, however, strongly suggests that Amelia and Fred ended up as castaways on the island and eventually met their end there. Some evidence supporting this includes artifacts like a piece of plexiglass, a woman's shoe, improvised tools, and a cosmetics jar from the era, even some suspicious bones. But despite expeditions and sniffing border collies, no conclusive proof has emerged. Now, what do Godzilla-sized crabs have to do with Amelia Earhart's disappearance? It turns out that these quirky creatures might possibly hold the keys to one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. These ginormous creatures, the coconut crabs, would make you think twice before you dismiss anything as too large. They tip the scales at a whopping 9 pounds and can stretch out to a startling 3 feet. To put it simply, they make your average pug look like a snack. This theory takes us back to that tiny island in the Pacific, where Amelia supposedly made a pit stop but left no trace, Nikumaroro. When people went looking for clues regarding the famous aviator's disappearance, one rule was drilled into their thoughts. Watch out for those monster crabs. Their pincers can really pack a punch. By day, our explorers could easily steer clear of these hard-shelled creatures. They'd find the crabs lounging under the lush coconut palms, or maybe enjoying the breeze among the branches of the trees. Yes, you heard right. These critters are also good at climbing. But when the sun sets, well, that's when things get crabby. Those courageous explorers quickly learned that sleeping off the ground was essential unless they fancied a late-night claw massage. You see, these jumbo crabs are like the leading actors in this theory about what happened to our heroine Earhart and her navigator. According to this hypothesis, when the aviators missed their mark at Howland Island, they improvised a landing strip on Nikumororo's reef. The plane eventually wandered off. Planes do that sometimes, you know, leaving Earhart alone on the island. Well, alone except for our mighty crustacean friends. By the 1940s, people had set up shop on the island and a chap unearthed some bones. However, he managed to find only 13 of them out of a possible 206, the total amount of bones in a human body. So, where did the rest of them go? You guessed it. Our robber crabs might have fancied a little midnight toy. Evidence indicates that the crabs have a tendency to clean up the island by dragging stuff back to their cozy burrows. Over the years, multiple experiments have been conducted to verify if these crabs have a peculiar hobby of bone collecting. In one such study, they introduced some bones to the island and kept their eyes peeled. Within a fortnight, the crabs had made a buffet out of it. In another exciting chapter, our researchers brought dogs from the Canine Forensics Foundation to give the area around a wren tree a good sniff. The dogs had earlier indicated that someone had kicked the bucket there. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't find any bones, but they're still hopeful. After all, if history has taught us anything, it's to never give up. These theories at least have some science to back them up. But as with many famous disappearances, there are also juicy ones. Was Amelia captured by someone? Were she and Fred secret spies who returned to the US under new identities? One of the craziest theories was neatly packaged in a book called Amelia Earhart Lives. The author put pen to paper and argued that our beloved Lady of the Skies didn't just vanish into thin air. Instead, she pulled a Houdini. And here's where things get extra zesty. According to this book, Amelia was nabbed by a foreign government. Thankfully, US officials came to her rescue. After a heroic effort, they transported her into the most clandestine relocation program ever. Her new identity? She transformed into a mysterious suburban housewife under the name Irene Bolam. But, as with all good stories, there was a twist. The hiccup was that Irene Bolam was already out there, living her life and probably whipping up a mean meatloaf in her suburban kitchen when she got wind of her new identity as a repackaged Amelia Earhart. Obviously, Irene wasn't too thrilled about this revelation, so she lawyered up and took a stand against the claims, vigorously denying this shocking identity swap.
You'll never believe this. Wait, maybe you will. Scientists have discovered stolen treasures worth $138 million on the ocean floor near Madagascar. Well, whatever. Let's be honest. It gives you little pleasure to hear about treasures that you'll never get. However, the story surrounding this find is just like an action movie. So here's the scoop about it. So let's see. Well, count them. 400 precious stones, including 110 diamonds and 250 emeralds, gold and silver bars, expensive silk, coins, relics, and many other valuable items. Even now, it seems like a jackpot. But for the 18th century, it was a real fortune, about $138 million by today's standards. In early 1721, sailors loaded all this stuff into a Portuguese treasury ship called the Nossa Senhora do Cabo. That's a mouthful. The Viceroy of Goa and the Archbishop of Goa also stepped on board. After that, the vessel sailed from Goa to Lisbon. The ship had not only economic but also diplomatic value. You probably already feel that something bad is going to happen to the boat. Well, good guess. Now, go buy a lottery ticket. During the voyage, the ship faced a severe storm. The waves rocked the ship and flooded it with water. The wind shook the mast. To increase their chances of surviving, the ship's crew needed to reduce the weight. Therefore, they began to dump their cargo into the sea. There were artillery shells among this cargo, and they were necessary for protection in case of enemies. It seems the crew didn't realize what a critical mistake they had made, but at that moment, they needed to stay alive. The ground appeared ahead. It was the island of Réunion. There, the ship waited out the storm and was ready to move on. But then another, more serious problem appeared. On April 8th, the ship, I'll call it the Nazca from here on, met pirates. Of course, the boat with such valuable cargo should have been equipped with powerful means of protection. But almost all of those were thrown overboard by the sailors during the storm. They had little chance of getting out of that mess alive. The pirates they faced were among the most dangerous pirates in history. And you know why? Because their leader was Olivier the Buzzard Levasseur. Now, let's take a small sidebar because it wouldn't be enough to say only a few words about Levasseur. The Buzzard was one of the most mysterious and terrible pirates in history, worse even than the dread pirate Roberts. People are still trying to solve the mystery he left behind, but more on that later. Now, what do you think is the normal life story of any pirate? Let's see, they were probably born in poor neighborhoods and grew up in poverty and brutality. They were used to getting what they wanted by threatening people, so they started plundering ships on the seas and oceans. Well, Olivier Levasseur wasn't like that. According to some stories, he was born in the north of France sometime between 1687 and 1690 into a rich bourgeois family. He had everything people of that time could ever dream of: well-off parents, a home, food, and a good education. He dreamed of becoming an architect, a priest, or a naval officer. In the end, he chose something close to the third. From 1701 to 1714, there was a great conflict in Europe. Different countries tried to control the Spanish Empire. During this difficult period, the French king, Louis XIV, gave Levasseur a letter of marque. From that moment on, the future pirate became an official privateer of the French crown. Now, roughly speaking, a privateer is also a pirate, only working for his country. A privateer could use his vessel to attack enemy merchant vessels and had to share the spoils from those ships with the royal treasury. So Levasseur became a legalized pirate. The king provided him with a good ship and finances for effective work. According to legend, while serving the king, Levasseur got an eye injury and began wearing a blindfold. That's when the classic image of a pirate with a black eye patch appeared. But this story is a legend. Probably. Levasseur learned how to rob other people's ships quite effectively. His toughness and skill helped him get a lot of treasures. At some point, he didn't want to share the loot with his country, so he decided to turn from a privateer into a free pirate. In addition, he dreamed of long-distance voyages and adventures. He wanted to rob ships not only in European waters, but in the far reaches of the Caribbean and South America. His pirate life lasted about 15 to 17 years. According to stories, in the beginning, he joined the crew of English pirate Benjamin Hornigold. He also collaborated with Samuel Black Sam Bellamy, one of the richest pirates in history. He robbed ships along with the famous Edward Teach, who you probably know as Blackbeard. Having spent a lot of time with such famous pirates, Olivier Levasseur himself became famous for his thoughtful attacks, knowledge of maritime affairs, and compliance with the pirate code. There's a pirate code? More like guidelines. He ensured the order, discipline, and behavior of the crew. Thanks to this, he managed to commit one of the most daring robberies in history during the encounter with a Portuguese ship, Nazca, etc. So the pirate hijacked the ship and grabbed all its goodies. The Viceroy of Goa and the Archbishop of Goa were also captured. The pirate released the Viceroy later for a big sum, but the fate of the Archbishop and the rest of the passengers remains, well, unknown. After that, the pirates sailed with the loot to the island of Sainte-Marie. In the 18th century, it was a place that no European colony paid attention to. There was no authority there, which is why pirates adored this crossroads in the Indian Ocean. Dozens of pirate crews used this place as a hangout. The anchorages of this island were located close to the main sea routes. This meant that pirates could quickly board their ship and set off to plunder vessels and then return. The fate of the Nazca and its valuable cargo remained unknown. For more than 300 years, researchers and historians have been trying to find the treasure and have only recently come closer to the answer. The ship wreckage was found near the island of Nosy Baraha in a harbor about 400 miles west of the place where the pirates had attacked the ship. Using sonar and remote sensing, experts created a map of the seabed and found fragments of a ship similar to the wreckage of the Nazca. They also found artifacts nearby. There were many wrecks of other ships in this region, so it took more than 2 decades to identify the find. Fortunately, the scientists were able to confirm that they had found the legendary ship. They discovered more than 3,000 objects and fragments that indicated that the wreckage belonged to the merchant vessel. Chinese porcelain, sculptures, ceramics, European coins, African shells, exotic spices – all this ended up on the seafloor. But where are the treasures that the pirates took? No one knows. But fortunately, we all have the opportunity to find out where one of the biggest pirate caches of all time is located. In 1724, an amnesty was granted to all pirates who sailed in the Indian Ocean. The French king freed them from persecution in exchange for the pirates sharing the loot. Levasseur didn't want to share with anyone and hid in a highland in the Seychelles. From that moment on, the hunt began for him. Levasseur managed to hide from the French authorities for several years, but then he was caught in Madagascar. On his last day, July 7, 1730, Levasseur ripped a necklace off his neck and threw it to a crowd of people. He said, "Find my treasure, the one who may understand it." The necklace contained a mysterious cipher which, according to the pirate, could lead to his hidden treasure. The cargo of the Nazca, worth $138 million, was far from the only loot. But where can we find all of it? Well, people are still trying to solve the mysterious cryptogram of Levasseur. However, many think that the story about the cipher is a fake. The first reports about it appeared only in the 1930s, so maybe it's all made-up rumors. Or some mountains look so picture-perfect that you'd swear they were hand-sculpted by a divine architect. And the thing is, you're not that wrong if you think so. Wait, did someone really build mountains? Hidden deep in the Amazon rainforest, there's a bizarre cone-shaped peak that raises that exact question. And halfway across the world, there's a landscape that looks like someone spilled a massive bag of Hershey Kisses across a green field. No, you can't make this stuff up. Get ready to learn what would happen if a Hershey's Kiss and the Road to El Dorado movie had a baby in real life, because we're diving into two of the most mysterious and oddly satisfying natural formations on Earth: Cerro El Cono in Peru and the Chocolate Hills in the Philippines. One might be an ancient lost pyramid, and the other turns into chocolate every year. Well, sort of. Let's start with El Cono. This strange, solitary mountain rises more than 1,300 feet above the treetops in the heart of the Amazon, right near the Peru-Brazil border. Sure, the Amazon is no stranger to mountains. There are impressive ranges, like the Ameri Mountains farther north and the Andes, not in the Amazon per se, but running along Peru's spine. But you see, El Cono is different. For starters, it's completely isolated. If you fly over the region in a helicopter, all you'll see for miles is an endless emerald sea of rainforest. Then, boom, out of nowhere, a perfectly cone-shaped mountain juts into the sky like a giant green Dorito. It's not part of any major mountain chain, it doesn't have any siblings, and it looks so symmetrical that it almost feels artificial. And it's covered by forest. Now, naturally, this has sparked all kinds of theories. Some people think it's an extinct volcano. Others say it's a freak of erosion. And then there are those who whisper more exciting possibilities. What if it's a lost pyramid? And before you roll your eyes, this idea is not as wild as it sounds. And some people actually stand by this theory. After all, the ancient civilizations of South America built pyramids too. What? Yeah, can you believe that the Egyptians didn't actually invent the concept of pyramids? No joke. The Mochi Chachapoya and Inca civilizations all built monumental structures. In fact, pyramids are found all over the world, from Ethiopia and Thailand to Greece, Mexico, and even Italy. So why do pyramids keep popping up throughout history? Simple. They're structurally sound. The broad base supports the weight, and the pointed top was often seen as a symbolic connection to the heavens. Okay, but what are the chances of all these people coming up with the same idea at the same time? Okay, calm down. Ancient aliens. Yeah, that's possible. But as it turns out, ancient people did talk to each other via trade, migration, and cultural exchange. Ideas like pyramids didn't need to come from a secret one-world civilization. They just came from smart, curious humans scattered across the globe, all looking up at the stars and wondering how to get closer. In fact, recent archaeological discoveries have revealed massive ancient cities deep in the jungle that were completely swallowed by nature. In Guatemala, scientists uncovered a lost Maya city with its own pyramid structures. In Mexico, an entire metropolis was found buried beneath forested hills. So yes, humanity can forget an entire city. Take another look at El Cono from the air, and you might start believing it too. Its slopes are smooth. Its symmetry is uncanny. From above, it resembles a colossal step pyramid or ziggurat, cloaked in jungle vines and secrecy. And if someone told you it was the moss-covered remnant of an ancient civilization, you might just nod and say, "Yeah, I see it." Of course, no one's proven anything yet, but the mystery is delicious, like a myth waiting to be cracked open. At the same time, for people who live nearby, El Cono isn't just a geological curiosity, it's sacred. In Andean cosmology, mountains like El Cono are known as apus, spiritual guardians of the land. These aren't just rocks, they're living beings, protectors, deities. Think Tifiti from Moana, but South American and a little more mysterious. The indigenous tribes in the region still pay their respects to this mountain, treating it not as a tourist attraction, but as a sacred ancestor. And while everyone's busy debating whether El Cono is a mountain or a pyramid, nature's just vibing. The area surrounding El Cono is now part of Sierra del Divisor National Park, created in 2015 to protect one of the richest ecosystems in the Amazon. We're talking about rare plants, hundreds of bird species, many types of monkeys, and endangered animals like jaguars, giant armadillos, and even tapirs, the jungle's adorable pig-elephant hybrid. And yes, there are caves, springs, and even undiscovered ruins hidden deep in the forest around El Cono. So, what is El Cono really? Some geologists think it's likely a volcanic cone based on its shape. That's the official word from UNESCO anyway. Others argue it's a rare example of erosional geomorphology, a fancy way of saying wind, water, and time teamed up to carve a perfect mountain out of the landscape. Like geological origami, shaped by millions of years of natural forces. But the truth is, we don't know. Not for sure. Not yet. Until someone launches a respectful science-based expedition with drones, ground-penetrating radar, and a green light from the local communities, El Cono will keep its secrets. And maybe that's the best part. Sometimes it's mysteries that make the world feel truly magical. Now, let's jump onto a metaphorical plane and head to the Philippines, where the mystery continues and gets a little sweeter. Spread across more than 20 square miles, there are between 1,200 and 1,700, or even more, perfectly shaped hills that look like chocolate kisses. Like seriously. In the dry season, the grass turns brown, and suddenly, it's like someone dropped hundreds of Hershey kisses all over the landscape. Sweet, right? These are the Chocolate Hills, duh. And they're some of the Philippines' most iconic natural wonders. From afar, they look almost too symmetrical, like some alien landscaper came down with a measuring tape and a sense of humor. But how did they get here? Well, according to scientists, the Chocolate Hills are a rare type of karst formation, a term used to describe landscapes formed when slightly acidic rainwater dissolves soft rock like limestone. In this case, the hills were once coral reefs and marine limestone that were pushed above sea level by tectonic forces. Over time, the exposed rocks got eroded by wind, rain, and underwater rivers, leaving behind this stunning army of symmetrical mounds. It's a geological marvel millions of years in the making. But science isn't the only explanation in town. Local legends are more fun. One story says the hills were formed when two giants got into a rock-throwing fight, launching boulders at each other until they collapsed in exhaustion, leaving the landscape littered with mounds, just like that one scene from the Hobbit movie. Another tale speaks of a heartbroken giant whose tears turned into earth, forming the hills as a tribute to his lost love. Oh. Today, the Chocolate Hills are a National Geological Monument and a major tourist attraction in the Philippines. They're also being considered for UNESCO World Heritage status, because, really, where else can you find such a naturally satisfying mix of geology and dessert? If you ever want to visit, it's pretty easy. Fly into Boho Palango International Airport or take a ferry from Cebu, and then head to the towns of Carmen, Batuan, or Sambanga. There are designated viewing decks, eco-parks, and even ATV tours that will let you explore the hills up close. So, whether you're chasing lost pyramids in the jungle or climbing a mountain that turns into chocolate in the summer, the planet still has places that surprise and delight. And that's the real treasure. Sometimes, nature's weirdest, most beautiful shapes aren't hiding aliens or ancient tech. They're just proof that Earth has a wild imagination. Stone Age people were grunting cavemen with spears. True or false? Absolutely false. They were gathering around and forming real culture as far as we've discovered. In Turkey, scientists uncovered a 12,000-year-old mystery that's revising history. It's a sophisticated cosmic calendar made out of giant stone temples that may actually be a warning from the stars. We're talking about Göbekli Tepe. This prehistorical site predates even Stonehenge, our classical stone ring circle, by 6,000 years. And it upends why we think Stone Age civilizations emerged and thrived. Here's how this discovery could change our collective history. Around 10,850 BCE, a massive comet, or better yet, a bunch of comet fragments, smashed into Earth. The skies darkened, the temperature dropped, big animals vanished, and it kicked off a mini ice age that lasted over 1,200 years. What's now a place called Göbekli Tepe was home to a group of humans who survived this entire chaotic event. After it happened, they started paying close attention to the sky. As a way of trying to control time a little bit more, they tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, the planets, and comets. This in turn led them to build a huge lunisolar calendar, the first one in the world. Now, if you were to tour around this classic Stone Age monument, you'd see that not all the stone pillars are blank. Some of them have carvings, like this main one with a bunch of V's on it. Turns out there are 365 V's, which scientists believe represent the days of the solar year. One of them, a V hanging on a bird's neck, is thought to mark a solar eclipse. Other pillars have dangerous animals carved on them, like foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, twisting and crawling up the sides. Unlike typical Stone Age carvings, these weren't of edible animals like deer or sheep. One of the theories is that these drawings were symbolic. Some archaeologists believe they reflect the fears and chaos this civilization had lived through, a kind of collective attempt to make sense of a terrifying and unpredictable world. Archaeologist Danielle Stordour has highlighted the images of vultures, saying they represent the people who passed away. In some ancient cultures, vultures were believed to carry the souls of the deceased into another realm. She's seen similar symbols in ancient sites nearby. To understand why this all makes sense, we need to dig deeper into the real purpose of this site. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who realized that the hill in southeastern Turkey wasn't just another Neolithic mound. Underneath it, his team uncovered massive stone circles supported by pillars weighing up to 20 tons. Radiocarbon dating puts the site at around 12,000 years old, making it the oldest known ceremonial structure ever built. I mean, it predates the Egyptian pyramids by over 7,000 years. This discovery shocked the archaeological world. At the end of the Ice Age, humans were supposed to be nomadic, surviving off wild plants and animals, not building sacred complexes with symbolic art, and giving birth to what we now classify as civilization. We usually think civilization starts with farming, then villages, then crops. But this site suggests something more surprising. Early humans may have come together not to grow food, but to worship. Schmidt found no signs of homes, hearths, or permanent settlement, just stuff used for rituals and gatherings. This has led researchers to believe that spirituality and communal rituals came first and that farming followed. Because to build something this massive, you'd need hundreds of people working together, which in turn would have sparked the need for food, organization, and social structure. In other words, the temple came first, then the village, then the farm. Now, Göbekli Tepe isn't just stirring debate because it's old. It's because it seems too advanced for its time, and that's where the more controversial theories start to emerge. Some researchers believe the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't simply primitive hunter-gatherers experimenting with stone tools. They may have been the inheritors of ancient knowledge, remnants of a much older civilization that existed before the end of the last ice age. This idea ties into the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a theory that a comet struck Earth around 10,850 years ago, triggering a sudden and catastrophic climate shift. According to this view, the survivors of that event passed down their knowledge through symbolism, architecture, and oral tradition. And Göbekli Tepe could be one of the earliest attempts to preserve that memory. Now, if that's true, then the carvings at this site, especially the animal symbols on the pillars, aren't just decorative. They could be astronomical codes, tracking constellations and celestial events. But one pillar might hold the biggest secret of all. It's called the Vulture Stone, and it's freaking archaeologists out. On it, you'll find a strange combination of figures: a headless man, birds, and a scorpion. To the untrained eye, it might seem random, but some researchers believe these are ancient representations of constellations, like Scorpius among them, and that the headless man symbolizes a mass extinction event. Some even argue that this is the oldest known record of a comet impact, the one that triggered the Younger Dryas. And if you're wondering who this older lost civilization might have been, they are called Atlantis, or more neutrally, Civilization X. Theorists like Graham Hancock suggest that this advanced culture, destroyed in the chaos of the comet impact, passed fragments of its knowledge to survivors around the globe. In that case, Göbekli Tepe wasn't the start of civilization, it was the restart. Now, back to the stones. Pillar 43 may look like a celestial calendar at first, but when archaeologists recreated the sky patterns encoded in its carvings, they found a precise snapshot of the sky dating back over 13,000 years. It appears to show a meteor shower, a flood, and humanity's tragic end, aka the Headless Man. A snake rising from the ground might even symbolize tidal waves or destruction coming from below. But the story doesn't end there. Pillar seems to expand on the same disaster, the one they called the Terror of the Sky. You might see animals fleeing, waves, fire raining down. It paints a vivid picture of the meteor shower. But wait! While Pillars 43 and 56 may encode memories of a past catastrophe, Pillar 18 might be a forecast. That stone zooms in on the Aquarius constellation. If this sounds familiar, maybe it's from the phase Age of Aquarius, which is the age we're living in now. Some enthusiasts believe this may be a warning for us, and may be telling us that a similar meteor shower will hit Earth and thus you and me and us. I mean, chills! But hey, that's the kind of mystery that makes Göbekli Tepe so captivating. Today, archaeologists know that Göbekli Tepe was part of a much larger sacred complex, now known as Taş Tepeler, a network of ancient sites across the region, each with its own secrets and structures, but connected by shared patterns and motifs. In 2019, excavations began at this sister site, just 40 miles from Göbekli Tepe, known as Karahantepe. And here's the twist. Some researchers believe Karahantepe might be even older. Unlike Göbekli Tepe, which appears to have been primarily ceremonial, Karahantepe has signs of domestic structures like walls, tools, and perhaps even homes. And that changes everything. Because whether these sites were the work of highly sophisticated hunter-gatherers or survivors carrying the fragments of a lost pre-Ice Age civilization, one thing becomes clear: our ancestors weren't just surviving. They were planning, tracking, and predicting. They were far more capable, curious, and connected to the universe than we ever gave them credit for.
Scientists found a new statue on Easter Island, inside the crater of an old volcano. They were sure they already cataloged all the Moai. That's what they call those famous stone giants. But this discovery changes what we know about them. First of all, the Moai were rarely alone, so we may hear about more of them in the same area. Second, it's the first Moai found at the bottom of a lake. Scientists were working on a project to restore the marshland in the volcano's crater when they stumbled upon the statue. The lake that was here began to dry up in 2018. For at least 200 or 300 years, it was almost 10 feet deep, so it would be impossible for humans to build or put a statue on the bottom. Scientists think the Moai are over 500 years old. It's possible that the Rapa Nui people who built them probably brought the statue here when the lake was dry in the past. The new find turned out to be slightly over 5 feet tall, which is smaller than the other statues on the island. It's a full-bodied one with recognizable features. Researchers also plan to do radiocarbon dating to find out the exact age of the statue. They don't plan to remove it from where it was found because the oldest members of the Rapa Nui community want it to stay where it is. Moai statues kept scientists puzzled for centuries. They knew that they were built as a dedication to the island's chiefs, but no one could figure out why they chose these various locations for the statues. Most of them were found along the coast of the island. Researchers from Binghamton University in New York decided to study the locations more closely and learned that it had to do with water. Easter Island has porous volcanic soil that absorbs rain easily, so there aren't enough streams or rivers and too little fresh water. Hundreds of years ago, the island's people relied on groundwater discharge to get drinking water. The water stored deep underground in rock or soil layers, called aquifers, reach a point where it flows up to the surface. When this underground water emerges near the coast, it mixes with the salty seawater, but the salt level remains low enough that the water is safe to drink. The islanders used to collect this water directly from the spots where it flowed out. And it looks like that's why they built the Moai along the coast, right near their most important water source. The main bodies of most of the statues were made of volcanic tuff from a local quarry in what used to be a volcano. This material is easy to carve, but not so easy to transport. That's probably why researchers found over 300 unfinished Moai back in the quarry. The rest of them stand in various locations, facing the villages. It looks like the statues were carved lying on their backs. Then, their sculptors detached them from the rock, moved them downslope, and set them in a vertical position to finish the work. When it was done, it was time to move the statue to its platform. And we're talking about moving statues that weighed around half as much as a single-story, unfurnished house without a car or any modern equipment for 3 miles. The locals must have invented some original transportation method. Scientists tried to recreate it and pulled Moai replicas on wooden sleds. They thought someone would have used palm trees for that purpose, but this theory has been debunked. The most successful experiment so far was wielding ropes to rock the statue down the road in a standing position. This sounds legit, because the local Rapa Nui legends mention that the Moai walked from the quarry. And of course, they needed a good road to get there. In the early 20th century, researchers Catherine Rutledge found an 800-year-old road network on the island. It was a bunch of pathways around 15 feet wide going from the quarry. She thought that those roads were ceremonial and not built just for the statues. She wasn't a famous scientist back then, so others mostly ignored the theory. Several decades later, famous Norwegian adventurer and archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl published his theory. He mentioned that the roads were there exclusively to transport the Moai, and some of the statues were dropped along the way for some reason. But in 2010, researchers found that the statues reached their final destinations because they were all set on hidden platforms. The road floor was U-shaped, so pulling massive statues along them wouldn't be easy. You can still find roughly 15 miles of these roads on the island and see them from satellite images. Scientists used to believe that the Rapa Nui people made Easter Island unlivable and ruined their own civilization. But a new study that used remote sensing data and machine learning says that the island's population didn't grow too big and collapse. Instead, the islanders figured out how to live in this challenging place and kept their population small and steady for hundreds of years. Researchers found amazing rock gardens as proof for this new theory. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is one of the most remote places on Earth where people live. It's surrounded by the Pacific Ocean. Central Chile is 2,200 miles to the east of it, and French Polynesia is 2,600 miles to the west. The island, which is 63 square miles in size, is made entirely of volcanic rock. But the volcano stopped erupting a long time ago. So, Rapa Nui's soil has lost most of the useful nutrients that lava once brought here. It's also drier than tropical islands, and its deep waters made fishing much harder for the settlers, as there's no shallow lagoons or reefs to fish in. So, the islanders came up with a smart farming method called rock gardening to survive here. They spread rocks of different sizes over the soil and planted crops like sweet potatoes and taro between the rocks. The rocks protected the plants from harsh winds and salty air and helped regulate the soil's temperature. They also slowly released minerals into the soil, so it became healthier for growing food. Some islanders still use these gardens, although they don't produce a lot of food. People in places like New Zealand, the Canary Islands, and the US Southwest have used similar techniques to grow crops in uneasy environments. While scientists are solving Easter Island mysteries, the island itself is teaching them something new about how the Earth's mantle works. For years, they thought it moved like a slow conveyor belt, carrying tectonic plates along with it. But a new study by geologists from Cuba, Colombia, and the Netherlands is challenging this idea. They used a special method called zircon dating to figure out the island's age. Zircons are tiny crystals that form when magma cools, and they have traces of uranium inside that turns into lead over time. So, the scientists measured this change to tell the age of zircons. And they were shocked when they saw that some zircons were way older than expected, around 165 million years old. The island itself is only 2.5 million years old. The scientists found that these ancient zircons came from deep inside the mantle, under the tectonic plate, by magma from earlier volcanic activity. Easter Island's volcanoes are part of a group called hotspot volcanoes, formed by hot plumes of rock rising from deep within the Earth. Normally, these plumes stay in one spot while the Earth's crust moves above them and creates a chain of islands, like Hawaii. But the discovery of ancient zircons on a younger island shows there's more going on deep underground than we thought. Research showed that 165 million years ago, a giant volcanic plateau existed where Easter Island is now. But 110 million years ago, it sank under Antarctica because of tectonic subduction. Ancient zircon minerals stayed put and didn't travel away with the mantle conveyor belt. So, it looks like the mantle near hotspot plumes doesn't flow as much as scientists used to think. It stays still. This new idea could lead to big changes in how we understand plate tectonics and how the Earth's inside moves over time.
In the UK, there are around 115,000 mailboxes, with some of them placed in questionable locations. Look here, we're on a deserted stretch of Caithness Moorhead, and here, just smack dab in the middle of nowhere, between the quarry and some moorland, stands a solitary mailbox. It was local teacher Chris Aitken who stumbled upon this oddity near Worth Hill, close to John O'Groats. Now, John O'Groats is a tiny village 2.5 miles northeast of Canis Bay, in the historic county of Caithness, Scotland. The village itself is popular with tourists, but only houses around 300 people on a regular basis, and they have their own mailboxes there. So why would someone need one on a random hill? When Chris shared a photo online, someone chimed in with a theory. A while back, an entrepreneur was selling tiny parcels of land near Campster, claiming buyers became lairds with their little plots. Could this mailbox be related to that? Now, the box, proudly labeled Laird of John O'Groats, features the name Thorsten Sommer and an address in Germany. There's a PIN number on the front, but when Chris opened it, all he found was a website link. The site has pics of Sommer waving a Scottish flag and talking about his love for Scotland, even calling himself the Old Scotsman. Chris tried reaching out through the website for more info, but hasn't heard back. It might be linked to Sommer's reported purchase of a tiny patch of land. But buying Scottish laird titles is often seen as a fraud, giving no real title at all. The area around Worth Hill has had some recent police action too, after a body was found nearby. Ooh, could that somehow be connected to this mysterious mailbox too? Well, enough of the detective stories. Let's dive into some high-end fashion, shall we? So, you might have come across that funky image popping up all over the internet, claiming there's a pop-up Prada store in the Texas desert. Well, it's kind of true and kind of not. Yes, there's a shop, sort of. It showcased a whole range of Prada gear worth around $80,000. And guess what? Miuccia Prada herself handpicked the items. But still, you couldn't buy a single thing there. No cashiers, no shop assistants. It was like the place was permanently closed. The twist? It's actually an art installation. Made entirely of biodegradable materials, it was designed to gradually blend back into nature, taking a fun jab at our current consumer culture. But why display goods you can't actually buy? Well, it's a metaphor for the elusive charm of luxury. While it was meant to decay in peace, the hype surrounding it led to a surprising amount of foot traffic and even some chaos. After trying to fend off a few would-be thieves, the artist had to admit defeat. Now it's a hotspot for photos, drawing everyone from tourists to celebrities. Right, you can find a brand purse in the desert, but can you, let's say, find a car somewhere in Welsh caves? Well, the answer is yes, and let me tell you, it's not just one car, but many of them. The Cavern of Lost Souls is a well-known abandoned car cave tucked away in Wales. Once upon a time, it was a slate mine in Ceredigion, where workers pulled out tons of slate and transported it using narrow-gauge horse-drawn tramways. But as the mining industry faded away decades ago, the mine fell into a hush. If you dare go inside, which I personally do not recommend, you'll find two large chambers, but one is particularly noteworthy. The main chamber plunges around 65 feet deep and is mostly underwater, with just a small opening above. Since the mine shut down, locals and the council have taken advantage of that opening, tossing in all sorts of unwanted stuff. You'll find everything from fridges and TVs to even whole cars piled up in one corner. What makes the Cavern of Lost Souls special is the single beam of light that breaks through, casting its glow on the twisted heap of wrecked cars and metal. The water, when hit by that light, glows a stunning turquoise green, creating beautiful reflections of the cars and cavern walls on the still surface. Every now and then, a fragment of slate falls, shattering the quiet and sending ripples across the water. There was yet another weird find in Wales. A shiny 10-foot silver monolith recently popped up on Hay Bluff in Powys, Wales, and it's sparking a ton of curiosity. A local builder, Craig Muir, discovered it during his hike, and he described it as looking like it just dropped down from space. It's made of surgical steel, has no markings, and is super well crafted without visible welds. Muir's find is reminiscent of those mysterious monoliths that popped up worldwide in 2020, creating quite a buzz online. Local Richard Haynes suggested it could be some kind of scientific installation. But with national park rules against unauthorized structures, it might not be there for long. With no visible tracks around it, Muir speculated it could have been brought in by a group or even dropped from a helicopter. Now, this isn't the first strange monolith sighting. Similar ones have been spotted in Utah, the Isle of Wight, and even Glastonbury Tor, where one was humorously marked "Not Banksy." However, it could be easily him. The UK is the leading country in terms of the number of Banksy's pieces of art. As of 2023, there were 70 of them. No wonder, as he is reportedly British and was born in Bristol. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, the driest non-polar desert on Earth, features a bizarre sight at kilometer mark 1309 on the Pan American Highway, a giant cement hand that towers 36 feet above the sand. Looks creepy, right? Well, worry not. It's not some creepy monster trying to grip you and take you to the netherworld. It's not an ancient relic from a lost civilization either. A professional sculptor created this quirky landmark back in 1992. Despite its remoteness, the hand is frequently targeted by graffiti, so local volunteers must clean it up twice a year. And by the way, it's not the only landmark of this kind. The very same sculptor also created a similar hand in Punta del Este, Uruguay, called Man Emerging to Life, and it represents the idea that a giant might be holding South America in a stone grip. Hey, works for me. Now check out this giant stone sphere hidden in the forest of Bosnia's Visoko Valley. What do you think? Is it an ancient relic or a modern art installation? Share your thoughts in the comments. But to be completely frank with you, which I always am, nobody really knows for sure. Experts think this sphere, which measures around 10 feet across, is just a naturally occurring rock formation called a concretion. These iron-rich balls get their reddish color from the high iron content and form when mineral particles stick together over time. While concretions can take on some pretty wild shapes, the exact process of how they form is still a bit of a mystery. Then there's this archaeologist, often called the Bosnian Indiana Jones, who claims it's actually a man-made artifact from over 1,000 years ago. Spherical concretions aren't unique to Bosnia, though. You can find them all over the world, like these boulders in New Zealand, massive round stones that are over 60 million years old. There are also cannonball concretions in North Dakota. And let's not forget about the man-made stone spheres crafted by the Dicas people in Costa Rica, which are perfectly shaped and arranged, definitely a testament to human creativity. So while the Bosnian sphere is super intriguing, it's probably just an ancient concretion and not a remnant of a lost civilization. Bummer. Finally, some things are so well hidden that you have to go deep down into the seafloor to get a glimpse of them. Once a hedonistic hotspot for the Roman elite, Baia was like the Las Vegas of its time, but now its ruins are submerged underwater. This resort city thrived on volcanic hot springs and attracted the likes of Nero and Caesar, who even built vacation villas there. However, in the 8th century, Baia lost a battle and was abandoned by 1500. As the water levels rose, much of the city was lost beneath the bay. Today, you can explore Baia's ancient ruins in one of the few underwater archaeological parks in the world. Hold your breath.
It's June of 1857. A fierce storm slams into Gechen Bay, Australia, and rips apart a Dutch ship weighing 800 tons. Part of the crew tries to escape in a small boat, but only 9 of the 25 men on board survive. Now, many years later, researchers believe they've found this long-lost gold rush shipwreck. Yep, this ship is tied to one of the most dramatic high-stakes chapters in Australia's history. We're talking about the shipwreck of Koning Willem de Tweede, a vessel built back in 1840. This historic ship discovery is a big deal since it's now considered a real treasure in the world of underwater archaeology in Australia. Let me tell you why. By the middle of the 19th century, Dutch ships were carrying not just goods, but also people from Asia who were hoping to start a new life in Australia. And they were all chasing one thing: gold. Yep, the precious metal was discovered in Australia in 1851. Well, officially at least. It was actually found a few years earlier, but let's just say the authorities decided to keep that little detail away from the newspapers. Anyway, the big public discovery happened in 1851 when an Australian gold prospector named Edward Hammond Hargraves led an expedition in the New South Wales region, and he chose to tell everyone about his find. And just like that, the gold rush began. News spreads fast, so people start arriving from everywhere: Britain, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, and also from China. It's estimated by that time around 20,000 Chinese had made their way to the goldfields in Victoria. By 1861, about 3% of the Australian population had been born in the Asian country. Most of them came from the southern region of Guangdong, which was going through a really tough time back then. They'd been through it all: foreign invasions, massive floods, serious food shortages, you name it. Many people had lost everything. Their money was gone, their homes destroyed. They couldn't even afford a bite to eat. There was no clear way out of the poverty they were stuck in. But then, word started to spread. There was a goldfield somewhere in a distant British territory. They heard stories from people all over the world going there, that it was peaceful, full of opportunity, and that the land itself had everything you could need. It sounded like a dream. Before long, they began calling it Xinjin Shan, or New Gold Mountain. So, many scraped together what little they had left to reach Australia and start over. It was a shot at a better life, a chance to lift entire families out of poverty. But getting there wasn't cheap or easy. They had to travel in huge ships, and the average trip from Guangdong province took about 3 months to reach Sydney or Melbourne. At some point, Australian authorities decided to impose a tax on Chinese arrivals. Every passenger who disembarked at Victorian ports had to pay a £10 poll tax. So what do you think happened? The routes changed, of course. Instead of docking directly in Victoria, ships began stopping in Robe, a town in the southeastern part of South Australia. From there, people would walk about 250 miles all the way to the goldfields, just to avoid paying the tax. And this area is exactly where the Koning Willem de Tweede was discovered. Yep, our Dutch ship was found off the Robe coast, and it was one of many vessels that carried Chinese passengers to Australia. Now you can see why it's historically important, right? On the 16th of June, 1857, it brought around 400 people safely to shore so they could start their lives over. The ship itself didn't get a happy ending though. After dropping them off, it was supposed to continue its journey, but then a storm rolled in. So the ship had to drop anchor and wait it out in Geechin Bay. The weather kept getting worse. The anchor began to drag, and by the 13th of June, it was completely lost. The captain, called Hendrik Geisen, had to act fast. He made the call to beach the ship in hopes of saving both the vessel and his crew. But there was a problem. The ship ran aground on Long Beach, about 3 miles east of Robe, and it started breaking apart quickly in the rough seas. The rest of the story is tragic. 16 sailors drowned when one of the ship's small boats turned upside down. Only 9 men made it out alive. Captain Geisen stayed aboard the wreck. He eventually reached the shore by clinging to a cask. Thankfully, people who were on the beach managed to pull him out of the sea using a rope. A few months later, things from the wreck were sold to a local man in Robe named Jacob Chambers for £225, which was a pretty big amount of money back then. And that's because people were able to save a good amount of stuff from the wreck, like the bell, some doors, and wooden planks from the hull. Those doors and some of the timbers were later used to build the Caledonian Inn, a historic 2-story stone hotel that went up in 1859. As for the bell, it was supposedly used at Robe Primary School for over 100 years, but researchers aren't so sure about that part. What we do know is that most of the ship's remains were still missing, until now. After 3 years of hard work, a team affiliated with the Australian National Maritime Museum believes they have finally found the Koning Willem de Tweede. The project kicked off in April of 2022, and its main goal has been to search for, locate, and carry out an archaeological survey of the shipwreck's remains. To do that, they mainly used 2 tools: underwater metal detectors and a marine magnetometer, a device that detects changes in the magnetic field of the seafloor. Soon, this technology started picking up a bunch of anomalies in the area where the shipwreck was believed to be. And by anomalies, I mean weird signals. clues that something might be buried under the seabed, probably hidden under layers of sand or mud. They believe those signals were coming from the iron parts of the ship's windlass. That's a big winch at the front of the ship used to pull up the anchors. Some of those pieces were sticking up slightly from the seabed, along with a partially exposed iron frame. They also spotted a well-preserved wooden plank underneath the windlass, which suggests that more of the ship's hull is still down there, just buried under the sand. So why do they feel confident that this wreck is the Koning Willem de Tweede? Well, basically for 3 reasons. First, the location. The spot where they picked up those signals lines up with historical accounts of where the ship went down. And it just so happens to be the only known shipwreck in that part of Long Beach. Second, the size. The cluster of magnetic signals roughly matches the ship's documented length, which is about 140 feet. Third and last reason, they found pieces of Chinese pottery from the 1800s right on the beach next to the site. When you put all those facts together, it basically screams Koning Willem de Tweede. That's why the team feels so confident they've finally discovered this historic ship. But even though they have good reasons to believe it, more research still needs to be done, so they're planning future visits to the site to keep monitoring things. The goal is to check the ship's condition and look for more parts of the hull or artifacts that might get uncovered as the seabed shifts over time. Let's hope they get lucky next time around.
The Sahara Desert is like a Mad Max movie. Scorching heat, endless dunes, and an overall barren wasteland. A place where no one could live, right? Well, forget all you know about it, because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush paradise of grasslands, lakes, and rivers, and the home of a ghost civilization that vanished without a trace. Our tale begins in the 1930s, when a Hungarian explorer stumbled upon a cave in the middle of the Sahara. Inside, he found something bizarre: ancient rock paintings of people swimming in a lake, surrounded by giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. At the time, everybody shrugged it off as some symbolic depiction of the afterlife, because really, who would imagine a lake in the Sahara? Well, fast forward some 70 years later, when a group of archaeologists made a discovery that flipped the script. In a rock shelter in Libya, they unearthed 15 mummies, along with baskets, ceramic pots, and other everyday items. This may look like prehistoric junk to most people, but to archaeologists, it was like uncovering a key piece of evidence. Those people weren't just passing through, they lived here. You see, those weren't just any mummies. They were some of the oldest naturally mummified humans ever found, dating back over 7,000 years. Take that, Egypt. 2 of them still had readable DNA, preserved thanks to a rare natural mummification process, almost a miracle considering the Sahara's climate's ability to turn everything into, well, beef jerky. Scientists struggled to understand where those mummies came from for a while, because the mitochondrial DNA they recovered was not helpful at all. But thanks to scientific progress, they eventually managed to do a full genome analysis that revealed some weird secrets. Those people belonged to a human lineage that was completely unknown, and they lived isolated from the rest of humanity for thousands of years. For decades, researchers assumed that the place where they lived, the Green Sahara, was like a prehistoric highway, a lush corridor that humans and animals used to migrate between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. But the mummies demolished that theory, like a hippo sitting on a sandcastle. Their DNA showed 0 genetic mixing with sub-Saharan and Eurasian migrants, keeping their genes pure for 7,000 years. Their closest genetic relatives weren't their neighbors living right below the famous desert, but some ancient hunter-gatherers from Morocco, and even some guys that lived in the Czech Republic, when it wasn't even a country yet, 50,000 years ago. We're not out of the woods yet, because those mummies also carried some teeny-tiny traces of Neanderthal DNA, just 10% of the amount found in modern Eurasians. Now, if you paid attention in school, then you know that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, and early humans only mixed with them after migrating out of Africa. But those Green Sahara folks never left Africa. So how did they get Neanderthal genes? The leading theory is that their ancestors mingled with Neanderthals in North Africa 50,000 years ago before settling in the Sahara and cutting off contact with the outside world. Archaeologists also found cattle bones and tools made of stone and wood at that rock shelter, proving that those people led a thriving pastoral lifestyle. This discovery made scientists scratch their heads for a while because, you see, animal domestication was not developed in Africa. So how did they learn it if they never mingled with anyone? Did they have ancient YouTube tutorials? Probably not. The researchers believe they must have traded knowledge with neighboring groups, but just knowledge, no saliva. It's almost too hard to believe that no outsiders mixed with them. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a thriving civilization in the middle of a green paradise, drinking milk, eating meat, and even using animal blood as a protein source? Ooh, yummy. They didn't have to hunt for every meal, thanks to their livestock, and the abundant water made life pretty sweet. And yet, they never married outsiders. Why? Maybe it was a cultural choice to never date outside their own group. Or maybe the landscape itself kept them isolated. This is where scientists place their bets. They believe that the dense forests and rivers that existed in the Green Sahara acted like nature's no trespassing sign, creating a geographical barrier that isolates animals, plants, and whole societies. This isolation is the reason why their genes were so unique. These guys weren't swapping spit with anyone else. But this genetic time capsule almost didn't survive. For most of the last ice age, the Sahara was even harsher than today, a true dead zone where humans couldn't survive. 70,000 years ago, even the toughest people disappeared, retreating to the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean coast. Why? Because Earth was a climate bully. Massive glaciers stole all the moisture, weakening monsoons until rain clouds barely reached North Africa. Then came the knockout punches. Armadas of icebergs flooded the North Atlantic, triggering devastating droughts each time. This was the Sahara's ultimate keep-out era. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world the Sahara turned green after all this, and then went back to being a desert again. Well, it all started 15,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, when Earth was shaking off the last ice age. Our planet's axis was a bit wobbly, and because of that, the northern hemisphere got closer to the sun, getting extra sunlight and heat. This eternal summer turned North Africa into a giant moisture magnet, pulling water from the Atlantic and making it all rain down on the Sahara. The result of this ridiculous amount of rain was a lush savanna, complete with lakes the size of small countries. But the African humid period was not just a one-time miracle. The truth is, this eternal on and off switch between green and desert happened to the Sahara more than 230 times since the desert was born. During one of these events, the Sahara even expanded, getting bigger than it is today. So when the Green Sahara showed up, you can bet it brought the ultimate ecosystem glow-up. This wasn't just a light dusting of grass. We're talking full makeover. The transformation was so complete, it even reshaped animal populations. Cheetahs suddenly struggled with the new prey dynamics, while rodents like the multi-mammate mouse thrived in the suddenly abundant grasslands. But don't pack your prehistoric swim trunks just yet. This paradise had teeth. The Sahara was an ecological maze of crocodile-infested rivers, malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and big cats lurking in the tall grass. Crossing it would have been like playing a real-life game of Hungry Hungry Hippos. This is probably why more groups didn't settle permanently. The Sahara's climate cycled between wet and dry every 20,000 years, hardly a stable zip code. For most ancient people, it was smarter to treat the Green Sahara like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grab resources and leave before the desert returned. Still, this Green Sahara period lasted for 10,000 years, giving our mystery shepherds plenty of time to thrive. But around 5,000 years ago, Earth's axis shifted again, the rains moved away, and the Sahara dried up faster than a puddle in July. As the desert returned, the shepherds from the Green Sahara had no choice but to pack up their livestock and leave. Some researchers believe they migrated toward the Nile, laying the groundwork for ancient Egypt, so I guess their legacy lives on. Besides, their pure lineage may be extinct by now, but some faint genes of the mummies can still be found in the people that live in North Africa today. But the introvert mummies were not the only ones using the Green Sahara as an Airbnb. They actually had neighbors just around the corner, in a lakeside village in Niger to be exact. Those people thrived for 5,000 years and left behind the oldest Sahara Desert cemetery, including a man buried in a turtle shell, a grinning Halloween man with filed teeth, and a heartbreaking family embrace frozen in time, victims of the very waters that sustained them. Eventually, those people disappeared too, just like it happened to our antisocial friends. This proves that this desert outsmarts everyone, with a landscape that gives paradise with one hand and takes it away with the other.
Look, the sea is glowing from within. It's stunning, yet eerie at the same time. White glow covering a huge area of the sea surface is not what you expect to see on a dark night. You look at one of the scariest and mysterious phenomena in the ocean. Let's study it. On January 30th, 1864, the Confederate ship CSS Alabama was sailing southwest along the Horn of Africa when the crew members noticed a mysterious white glowing sea. Captain Raphael Semmes described it as a sickly and unearthly glare of a phantom sea. Although Semmes was a stern and fearless sailor, he was scared by this bright water in the middle of the dark sea. At first, the crew thought they had been sailing over some kind of flooded ridge. They threw a weighted line, which immediately sank to the seabed several hundred feet down. Obviously, the mysterious glow was not a ridge. For several hours, the ship sailed through this eerie glowing sea, and then, suddenly, this bright region ended. The Alabama entered the usual dark waters. Captain Raphael Semmes' description was one of the very first documented accounts of a mysterious and elusive phenomenon called the Milky Sea. In 1851, in the famous book Moby Dick, this phenomenon was described as a sailor's quiet, superstitious fear at the entrance to the midnight sea of milky whiteness. Jules Verne, in his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, described this phenomenon more scientifically. One of the characters of his book said that the whiteness was caused by the presence of myriads of infusoria, a sort of luminous little worm, gelatinous and colorless. For centuries, people have reported mysterious glowing water at night, and only recently have scientists got closer to solving this mystery. But first, let's be clear. What Captain Raphael Semmes saw was slightly different from that violet-blue glow called bioluminescence. Aristotle wrote about luminous algae and phytoplankton in the 3rd century BCE. He noticed that sometimes the water produced bright blue flashes when he hit the surface of the sea with a baton. In 1492, Christopher Columbus observed unusual flickering of light in the ocean caused by bioluminescent marine worms. As it turned out later, those worms rose to the surface to perform a circular mating dance. In the late 1800s, scientists discovered that bioluminescence is the result of an oxidative reaction inside certain animal and plant cells. You might have seen it at night while walking along the shore. If not, you can watch a video with bioluminescent water on the internet. But milky seas are a slightly different phenomenon. The sea glows white as if it's illuminated by a bright spotlight, and the area of white water can extend for miles. Unlike bioluminescence, milky seas are a rarer and quite elusive phenomenon, which is why it was so difficult for scientists to determine its nature. People didn't come across such glowing waters very often, so many regarded it as legends about mermaids or sea monsters. But in 1985, science got a chance to study this thing in more detail. That year, a U.S. Navy research vessel got into the Milky Sea while sailing near the Arabian Peninsula. There were scientists on board who collected some samples of milky water and conducted a laboratory analysis. And that's what they found out. The water contained bioluminescent bacteria, but what caused them to glow? Scientists suggested that algae colonies first rose to the water's surface. They began to bloom and gradually decompose. Those cells of rotten algae burst and release special substances. lipids. A huge number of bacteria began to feed on lipids and multiply rapidly. The number of bacteria grew in such large numbers that they began to produce a continuous white glow. But where exactly and under what conditions could these milky seas appear? It was necessary to know not only for scientists, but also for authorities. Such a bright spot in the water could reveal the outlines of a submarine and turn it into an easy target for enemies. So scientists continued their research. One of them was atmospheric scientist Stephen Miller. He started studying milky seas in the early 2000s and made a breakthrough in his research. To begin with, he decided to find out if the sensors on space satellites were capable of seeing bioluminescence. Miller started looking for any mention of extensive milky spots on the internet. He came across the Frontier Science portal, where people wrote about strange and unexplained phenomenon around the world. There, he found a report from the British merchant ship SS Lima, which hit the Milky Sea in January 1995 while sailing along the Horn of Africa. This is how the log entry described the event. The bioluminescence appeared to cover the entire sea area from horizon to horizon, and it appeared as though the ship was sailing over a field of snow or gliding over the clouds. After that, Miller collected the images taken by certain satellites over the place where the SS Lima sailed at that time. At first, he didn't notice anything strange. But later, he realized that he was looking directly at the Milky Sea. The area of the glowing spot was so large that he had to scale the image down. That's when he saw a spot that looked like a comma. The edges of this spot coincided with the place where the crew of the SS Lima saw the white glow. Miller studied the images of this area taken before, during, and after the encounter, and found out that the Milky Sea rotated counterclockwise to the local ocean currents. But most importantly, Miller now knew that the White Sea could be seen from satellites. In 2011, two satellites with more sensitive sensors, capable of seeing in poor light, entered Earth's orbit. They helped Miller and other scientists to find out that Milky Seas appeared most often in the winter and summer in the northwestern Indian Ocean and around Indonesia. Great! Now Miller had the place and time to work with. He analyzed satellite data for the period from 2012 to 2021 and found out that one of the largest Milky Sea incidents occurred in 2019. For 45 nights, a white glow covered 40,000 square meters, which is the approximate area of Kentucky. But even after all these studies, scientists haven't managed to find the exact cause of the white glow. In addition to the idea about the disintegration of algae, researchers have put forward a theory that the glow may be caused by quorum sensing. This is the ability of bacteria to communicate using chemical signals that produce light. Okay, let's say there's some truth to this, but why are they doing this? To find out, let's look at classical blue bioluminescence in other organisms. Some biologists suggest that with the help of the glow, bacteria attract partners for reproduction. Another theory claims that the bright light works as an alarm when dangerous enemies appear in the sea. For example, a colony of phytoplankton meets hungry fish. The organisms turn their glow on to attract larger fish. It's like using evil to fight another evil. There are many theories, but what's the problem with figuring out the exact reason? Even with all the satellite help and studies of Milky Seas, it's quite difficult to get to the right place at the right time. Let's say a white glow the size of a football field appears in the sea. The satellites notice this and send a signal to the research center. Next, a team of scientists boards a vessel and goes directly to the place. The distance to the Milky Sea can be quite big. And by the time they arrive, the glow has already disappeared. In an ideal situation, scientists need to be around the area before, during, and after the glow to get the full picture. Unfortunately, this is not possible at the moment. Stonehenge is famous, but it isn't the oldest UK monument of its kind in England. That title belongs to Flagstones, a site that predates Stonehenge by about 200 years. In fact, it's possible that whoever built Stonehenge might have been copycats, or perhaps, as some prefer, inspired by flagstones. Let's start unraveling the mystery of flagstones by looking at its exact age. To crack this ancient puzzle, scientists turned to a powerful technique: radiocarbon dating prehistoric monuments. This method works on organic materials like wood, bone, or charcoal that are up to about 60,000 years old. Each of these materials contains something called carbon-14. When an organism passes away, its carbon-14 starts to break down at a predictable rate. By measuring how much is left, scientists can estimate the age of these ancient objects. The method is really impressive, so it doesn't come as a surprise that the inventor of this method was awarded the Nobel Prize. Radiocarbon dating has revealed that people built flagstones around 3200 BCE, making it older than even the earliest parts of Stonehenge. But the mystery of flagstones is just beginning to unfold. Flagstones is located in Dorset, in southwest England, about 37 miles away from Stonehenge. It was discovered in the 1980s when workers were building a new road. Archaeologists dug up a huge circular ditch about 330 feet wide, made with overlapping pits. Inside the pits, they found the remains of at least 7 people, a cremated adult, 3 young individuals, and 3 other adults whose bodies were partly cremated. This shows that people could have used the site as an ancient cremation burial site. Flagstones is basically a big, ancient circle that popped up right where early farming communities were spending their time. If you went there today, you wouldn't see any obvious walls or banks, but if you look inside the pits that make up the circle, you'll find chalk rubble from both sides. That's a clue that when people dug these pits, they used the dirt and chalk they took out to build up banks both inside and outside the circle. This special spot sits right in the middle of a whole bunch of other really old monuments and sites, which were built over thousands of years during the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. Experts have figured out the ages of some of these nearby places really well. For example, the ditch at Maiden Castle dates back to around 3600 BCE, and the Big Henge at Mount Pleasant was built around 2600 BCE. Today, half of Flagstones is under that road, and the other half is under an old historic house looked after by the National Trust. You can find objects from the site at the Dorset Museum. Because flagstones and early Stonehenge look so similar, with round enclosures, pits, and cremated burials, scientists used to think they appeared at the same time. But thanks to radiocarbon dating, we now know flagstones, this ancient cremation burial site, is the earliest big circular monument ever found in Britain. To figure out how old the site really is, researchers tested things like human bones, red deer antlers, and charcoal found there. One of the most puzzling discoveries was a young man who was buried under a huge sarsen stone in the middle of the circle. Someone left him there about 1,000 years after people used the site for the first time. This find just added to the mystery of flagstones. You're probably wondering about the flagstones versus Stonehenge comparison. Well, the latter is a mystery on its own, a big old circle of giant stones in the south of England. Those who made it didn't write anything down, so we don't know exactly what they were thinking. One old tale says that King Arthur's wizard, Merlin, used magic to move the stones from Ireland, where giants had put them together. Another story says that people from Denmark built it. Today, some people think extraterrestrial visitors made it. A man named John Aubrey started studying Stonehenge in the 1660s. He thought the Celts had built it for their priests, called Druids, but that turned out to be wrong. Radiocarbon dating of this prehistoric monument shows that its constructors built it in phases over several centuries. The construction started around 3100 BCE and continued till around 1600 BCE. First, about 5,000 years ago, it was just a round ditch in the ground. Then people added wooden posts. Around 2600 BCE, they brought big blue stones from Wales. Later, they added sarsens, even bigger stones, each weighing as much as 5 elephants. They moved those stones from 19 miles away and placed them in a big circle with 5 tall stone arches shaped like a horseshoe. Experts think building Stonehenge took more than 20 million hours of hard work. And that's a lot of teamwork, strength, and planning for people who didn't even have machines. These days, there are a few different ideas about what Stonehenge was really used for. Some experts think it was a sacred place where people gathered for religious ceremonies. Others believe it was an early kind of science center used to study the sky and track time. Both groups notice that the stones at Stonehenge are lined up with the sun and moon. So people may have used the site to mark the changing seasons, especially during the summer and winter solstices. Some think it worked like a giant calendar, helping people figure out dates or predict things like solar eclipses. Stonehenge was an ancient cremation burial site too, at least for some time. Anyway, if we continue with the flagstones versus Stonehenge comparison, we can't but dwell more on the age of these monuments. Flagstones is older than Stonehenge. In fact, it's one of the oldest UK monuments. It's really special because it's the most ancient big round enclosure ever found in Britain. According to the newest studies, its age is about 5,200 years old. After it was built, more and more round monuments started popping up in other places too. Before its construction, most ancient monuments were long and straight, like rectangular barrows or burial mounds, or long ditches called cursus monuments. Some had even more random shapes, but the flagstones monument shows a big change. People were starting to build in circles instead. Some experts think this idea of circular monuments might have come from Ireland, where people were already burying cremated bodies in round tombs. On the other hand, even though flagstones has turned out to be older than Stonehenge, the new findings suggest that Stonehenge might need to be redated. Some of the objects found at Stonehenge, like animal bones, are actually older than the main structure itself. For example, near the entrances to Stonehenge, archaeologists found deer bones and cattle skulls that date to around 3,200 BCE. Experts used to think that people kept those bones for a long time before burying them. But it's possible there was an early version of Stonehenge made from overlapping pits that existed before the big circular ditch was built around 2,900 BCE. Now, could flagstones and Stonehenge have been part of a bigger shared tradition? Could there have been other ancient cremation burial sites in the UK? After all, these constructions aren't the only round prehistoric monuments in Britain. In Wales, there's a similar site called Llandegai, which also looks like a circular burial place. Such a way of burying the deceased might have been a common custom across the UK because you can see similar structures in Eastern Ireland. In the Boyne Valley, for example, there are ancient places like the Mound of the Hostages that people used in the same way. Now, researchers want to do more digging in Ireland to see if some of those monuments were built before 3,200 BCE. If they're even older than flagstones, they might help explain where the idea of building round burial sites started and why people across Britain and Ireland were building them. The more we learn, the better we'll understand what these sites were really for and how the people back then might have shared beliefs and traditions across the sea. Hopefully, one day, we'll figure out the mystery of flagstones, one of the oldest monuments in the UK.
Well, here you are, on a week-long trek through the Himalayas. You're exhausted, the cold is cutting through to your bones, and suddenly, you stumble upon a human skeleton near a lake. You look around, and there are dozens, maybe even hundreds of bones scattered across the ground. Well, guess what? This really happened in 1942 with an Indian forest official. Since this chilling discovery, researchers have been trying to figure out how so many people lost their lives in such a remote, isolated spot. So, what happened up there? We're talking about Rupkund, a lake sitting at over 16,000 feet in the Himalayas. But it's not just known by that name. People also call it Mystery Lake, or even more bizarrely, the Skeleton Lake. This place is remote, I mean really remote. It's not just because it's insanely high up, but also because it's surrounded by snow-covered mountains. Now, if you're planning to go there, make sure you have some solid hiking shoes. It's a week-long trek covering more than 30 miles of tough, rugged terrain. Along the way, you'll pass through all kinds of challenging landscapes: moss-covered oak forests, misty fields with an eerie vibe, and up at the top, snow. The highest point of the trek is a knife-edge ridge called Junargali. Just below that lies Rupkund. The closer you get to the lake, the darker the atmosphere feels. And on the ground, you can find human skeletons scattered around, belonging to more than 300 people. Along with them, there were things like wooden artifacts, leather slippers, and rings. Okay, so something really macabre happened here. But what? Well, we have three main theories. Theory number 1, the local legend. According to this story, a long time ago, a king named Raja Justival went on a pilgrimage deep into the Himalayas to reach a sacred mountain temple. He brought his pregnant queen, Rani Balumpa, along with a group of servants, dancers, and others. While they were up in the mountains, a massive hailstorm hit, or as the legend goes, an angry deity started hurling iron balls from the sky. Either way, the storm was brutal, and they had nowhere to take shelter. In the end, they all lost their lives near the lake. Theory number 2, an escape route. Some say the remains belong to Indian soldiers who tried to invade a foreign territory back in 1841, but they were defeated. Over 70 of them were forced to make their way back home through the Himalayas, and they met a tragic end along the way. Theory number 3, a mass grave. This theory suggests that some kind of widespread health issue hit the group. They were all buried there, in isolation, to prevent the disease from spreading. In this case, Rupkund Lake and its surroundings would basically be a cold, remote cemetery. Now, do you know what all these theories have in common? They all assume that the skeletons belong to a single group of people who died in one catastrophic event. But then science came along and things got way creepier. In 2019, 28 scientists from institutions in the US, India, and Germany teamed up for 5 years to figure out what the heck happened up there. They studied the remains of 38 individuals, 23 men and 15 women. And right there, we can already toss out theory number 2. That's important because if these people had been soldiers on a military mission, you would expect most, if not all of them, to be men. Armies in the past were almost entirely male. But here, there were just too many women for that to make sense. And on top of that, no signs of combat or military gear were found at all. After a genetic analysis, researchers noticed that the individuals weren't part of the same family, at least not by blood, like third-degree relatives or closer. And most importantly, they were mostly healthy. These two facts help rule out theory number 3. It probably wasn't some kind of highly contagious health problem. But the most shocking part is that these skeletons didn't belong to just one single group. They actually came from 3 distinct groups. The first group had ancestry that falls within the range of present-day South Asians, basically from the regions that are now India, Pakistan, and Nepal. The second group had ancestry typical of Eastern Mediterranean, just like people from today's Greece, or more specifically from Crete. And they also identified one individual with Southeast Asian-related ancestry. The dating also shows that these remains weren't deposited at the same time. In other words, groups 1 and 2 didn't live during the same period. Their deaths were actually spread out over as much as 1,000 years. Oh great, now theory number 1 is out the window too. After all, the studies can confirm that these people passed away in at least 2 separate tragic events. According to the researchers, there is a possible clue about where at least some of the people with South Asian ancestry might have come from, or why they were even up there in the first place. Rupkund Lake isn't part of any major trade route or anything like that. but it is along the path of a pilgrimage called the Nanda Devi Raj Jat. It still happens today, once every 12 years, where people hike through the mountains for worship and celebration. Now, the written records of this pilgrimage only show up around the late 1800s, but there are inscriptions in nearby temples that go way back, like to the 8th or 10th century. So, it's possible the tradition started much earlier, and maybe some of these people passed away during one of those early pilgrimages, due to a heavy storm or some other natural disaster. Okay, but how do we explain the group that came from Greece? Well, that's definitely more puzzling. First, because there aren't any historical records or evidence to explain who these people were or what they were doing in the far reaches of the Himalayas, so it's hard to know where to start. The study suggests that they could have been a group of unrelated men and women born in the eastern Mediterranean region around the time the Ottoman Empire controlled that area. The evidence suggests that they had a diet mostly based on land-based foods, not the seafood you would expect from people living near the coast. So they might have lived inland and somehow ended up in the Himalayas, possibly traveling for reasons that researchers can't fully explain yet. The best guess is that they were also participating in a pilgrimage, but honestly, it seems pretty unlikely that people from Europe would have traveled all the way to Rupkund just to do that. And let's assume they did. What exactly happened to them? I mean, how did they all pass away in the same exact spot? Well, the researchers can't say for sure, but people online love to speculate. You think? Some suggest that they fell from the Junagarli Ridge, or since they were at such a high altitude, maybe they passed away due to acute mountain sickness. Up there, the oxygen levels are much lower, which can lead to things like headaches, vomiting, and dizziness. The problem is, it can escalate quickly, and if it affects your lungs and brain, it can become life-threatening. So yeah, it could have happened. But it's still strange to think it happened to so many people all at once. We definitely still need a lot more answers when it comes to Rupkund. But one of the obstacles researchers face is that the site remains highly disturbed and unpreserved. Over the years, trekkers have moved around the skeletons, or worse, some have even taken them home as macabre souvenirs. But the more we mess with those remains, the harder it becomes to find an accurate answer in the future, no matter how much science advances. So, for now, the Mystery Lake will remain exactly that, a big mystery.
Not many civilizations are as mysterious as ancient Egypt. A powerful empire that lasted over 3,000 years. It gave us pyramids that still stand and myths that still inspire. It's one of the most explored places on Earth, yet somehow, we still find exciting stuff. In Abydos, archaeologists just uncovered a 3,600-year-old royal tomb. It's huge! It has golden hieroglyphs of deities covering the entrance, but the pharaoh's name? It's not there. It's missing. Who was this ruler? And what new chapter could this open in Egypt's story? If there's one place in Egypt where the line between life and demise feels thinner, it's Abydos. To the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred ground. They believed it was the burial place of Osiris, the god who literally passed away, had his remains separated, and came back to life to rule the underworld. Because of that, Abydos became Egypt's spiritual gathering place. Pharaohs built amazing temples here, like the Temple of Seti, famous for its King's List, a wall that has the names of 76 pharaohs carved in it. Pilgrims came from across Egypt, leaving offerings and participating in Osiris festivals, where his demise and rebirth were ritually reenacted. It wasn't just symbolic worship, it was Egypt's version of Comic-Con. But instead of cosplaying superheroes, people reenacted gods coming back to life. Obviously, pharaohs competed to be buried as close to Osiris as possible. Abydos became part cemetery, part holy city, part afterlife insurance policy. Fast forward thousands of years, and we still uncover remarkable stuff around Abydos. That's the case with the recently discovered tomb. In early 2025, a joint team of researchers from the US and Egypt decided to dig beneath a rocky rise ominously called Anubis Mountain. You remember Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who guarded cemeteries. The uncovered royal burial was hidden 23 feet below the surface. Sadly, even though it eluded archaeologists for so long, robbers had already taken away with treasures ages ago. They could definitely tell this was a tomb of someone super important. Similar to how you can walk around a mansion with no furniture but still deduce that someone rich must have lived there. The chamber had mud brick vaults rising over 16 feet. That's taller than a female giraffe standing upright. For something built 36 centuries ago, it still felt enormous. However, when you remember that Egyptians were masters of architecture, nothing seems surprising. So no treasures, no golden mask, and sadly, no name. The cartouche that should have spelled the king's identity was unreadable. Egyptian tombs usually bragged about who was inside. In ancient Egypt, a cartouche was basically a big oval name tag for kings wrapped in hieroglyphs. Think of them as VIP passes that worked in both this life and the next. Without it, your soul couldn't check into the afterlife hotel. That's because to the Egyptians, your name, your ren, wasn't just so your teacher could distinguish you from kids with the same haircut. It was a core part of who you were. As long as your ren survived, so did you. To have your name forgotten was considered a fate worse than passing away. A soul cannot journey without a name. That's why you'd see cartouches all over the place, on temples, obelisks, jewelry, statues, and tomb walls. It wasn't there just for the marketing. It kept the pharaoh's presence front and center everywhere you looked. Imagine building a massive tomb only for 3,600 years later to walk in and go, who is this guy again? Not cool at all. That's why it's fair to imagine our nameless pharaoh haunting the robbers for all eternity. So yeah, cartouche was considered very significant. One of the most famous and mind-blowing examples comes from the tomb of Thutmose III. His burial chamber and sarcophagus were literally shaped like a cartouche. In other words, the entire room was a living architectural symbol of his name. Thankfully, in the recently discovered tomb, not everything was erased. Painted in golden hues at the entrance were two familiar guardians, deities Isis and Nephthys. Isis was the magician who stitched Osiris back together and breathed life into him. Nephthys, her sister, was the eternal mourner and protector of the mummy. Together, they promised that whoever rested here would not face the afterlife alone, and it's one additional proof of the importance of the mysterious pharaoh. So, who could this be? To answer that, we need to go down history lane. This tomb dates back to Egypt's messy chapter called the Second Intermediate Period. Instead of one ruler in charge, the country had many rival kingdoms, each with its own little power base, like a real-life Egyptian version of Game of Thrones. And right in the middle of that chaos was Abydos. For a while, it was home to its own line of kings, the so-called Abydos dynasty. Those weren't the pyramid builders everyone knows, and that's why they're so mysterious. They left behind almost nothing. No great monuments, no sprawling cities, just fragments of names on broken blocks. For centuries, many scholars even doubted they existed at all. That sorta changed in 2014, when archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Senebkay, one of those shadowy kings. Now, everything we know about Senebkay points to him having quite a story to tell. His bones revealed 18 deep wounds, the kind you get in battle. He had blows to his skull, back, and hands, and likely lost his life fighting, making him one of the few pharaohs we know who sadly fell in combat. His tomb was modest, with reused artifacts from earlier kings, but it delivered one priceless thing: proof. Until Senebkay, the Abydos dynasty was just a theory. With him, it became real. And that's why the new discovery could be a big deal. The newly uncovered royal tomb at Abydos shares the same layout and style as Senebkay's. It has limestone chambers, mud brick vaults, and protective deities, although it's much bigger. Which again raises the possibility that we're looking at an even earlier, more powerful ruler of Abydos. Whoever he was, he wanted to be remembered alongside the greats. Which is ironic, because it seems that history tried erasing him. Perhaps additional findings alongside his tomb could tell us more. Yes, there's more, and it's actually pretty cool. Not far from Abydos, in the village of Banawit, archaeologists uncovered a Roman-era pottery workshop. Yeah, you heard that right, a pottery factory close to a pharaoh's burial ground. The site had huge clay kilns, storage rooms, and even broken shards called ostraca. They were basically ancient sticky notes. Except instead of shopping lists, those had receipts scratched onto them in Greek and Demotic Egyptian. Little records of everyday transactions, the kind of thing you'd never expect to find near a lost dynasty king. Honestly, the potters missed a chance. Forget boring receipts, they should have been selling Osiris's mugs and Anubis figurines to pilgrims and tourists. But that's not all. It seems that centuries later, during the medieval period, the same ground became a cemetery. Archaeologists found mud brick graves with skeletal remains. This could mean that Abydos kept its aura of significance for hundreds of years after the age of pharaohs. So why this hill again and again? Is this place really a getaway to the afterlife? It is, after all, the very place where Osiris is said to rest. That belief lingered like a shadow for thousands of years, strong enough to pull in pharaohs and later medieval families. Different rituals, same sacred ground. Although, to be fair, the Romans weren't here for Osiris. They came to make pots. The story of Abydos is not over. The excavations will continue, and who knows what else could be discovered in the future. Today, archaeologists are armed with tools that are basically X-ray glasses for the desert. Every scan could reveal a hidden chamber, or if we're lucky, finally give our nameless pharaoh his wren back to him. In fact, I became strangely invested in finding out who he was. So let's hope for some news soon. It's only a matter of time. Do you have your own theories? Let me know. Have you ever visited a famous monument and thought, alright, this is boring? While you were up on the Eiffel Tower yawning at the view, another landmark in Paris was pulling off the ultimate plot twist. Hidden in plain sight at Place de la Concorde stands a 3,300-year-old Egyptian obelisk that's been keeping juicy secrets from Pharaoh Ramses II himself. That's right. Ancient secret messages carved in stone have been right under our noses this whole time. Nope, this isn't the next National Treasure movie. This is real life, and it took a real-life Indiana Jones to crack the code. So, let's set the stage. You've probably seen this block of stone before, right? Towering 75 feet high, this massive granite pillar was originally from Luxor, Egypt, and it's been chilling in the heart of Paris since 1836. It's covered in hieroglyphs, and for years, everyone assumed we'd already cracked their code. Mystery solved. Nothing left to see here. Enter Jean-Guillaume Olet-Pelletier, French Egyptologist, cryptology expert, and part-time monument whisperer. Basically, if Indiana Jones traded his whip for reading glasses and binoculars, you'd get this guy. He's got a rather unusual hobby. He strolls up to the obelisk every now and then and casually reads hieroglyphs. For fun. Yes, he can read them fluently. No, we don't know what that says about our own hobbies. Until 2021, experts believed that the inscriptions on the obelisk mainly praise the gods Amun or Amun-Ra, if you're on friendly terms, and Horus, you know, the falcon-headed sky god with those super famous parents Osiris and Isis. But during one of his casual reading sessions, Olet-Pelletier noticed something odd. Some of the hieroglyphs weren't just singing praises to the gods, they were giving directions, literal directions, to the entrance of the temple of Luxor. But wait, it gets even better with a little backstory. Obelisks like this weren't just pretty lawn decorations. They were usually placed at the entrances of major temples, like the Temple of Luxor, where this one originally stood. They symbolize the sun god Ra and were meant to represent a ray of sunlight frozen in stone. Basically, they were giant sacred exclamation points showing off the pharaoh's divine connection and power. Ramses II had two of them set up at Luxor's entrance to honor the gods and, of course, to brag about himself. This one got shipped off to France in the 1830s as a gift from the ruler of Egypt, Muhammad Ali. No, not the boxer. And it's been waiting for someone to take a closer look at it. Moving the obelisk to Paris was no small feat. It weighed over 220 tons and had to be transported on a ship built especially for it, called the Luxor. How original. The whole transportation cost the modern equivalent to $19 million. Interestingly, its twin obelisk still stands in Luxor, which means that researchers can compare both structures to see if the story really matches. This pairing of obelisks was intentional, meant to guide the eye and the spirit towards sacred space. Lucky for us, Jean Guillaume picked the perfect moment to snoop around. The obelisk was undergoing restoration for the upcoming Olympic Games. Scaffolding was up, giving him rare access to the tippy top of the monument. Armed with binoculars and a ladder, he got eye level with parts of the pillar that most of us can only squint at from street level. And that's when he uncovered the real twist. Turns out, ancient Egyptians didn't just chisel random symbols into stone. They had something way cooler up their sleeves: crypto-hieroglyphs. Those were specialized, coded forms of writing used for sacred or elite messages. Basically, ancient VIP-only emojis. While your average temple priest could read standard hieroglyphs, crypto-hieroglyphs were reserved for the pharaoh's inner circle. Today, only 6 people on Earth can read them fluently. And wouldn't you know it, our French friend is one of them. Of course he is. Now, here's where things get wild. Normally, hieroglyphs written on monuments like the obelisk are read top to bottom, right to left. Simple enough. But Jean Guillaume decided to break the rules and read them horizontally instead of vertically. That's when he started spotting weird patterns, phrases, and symbols that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 200 years. Some of these messages were so cleverly hidden, and you could only understand them if you walked around the obelisk in a certain way. He calls it 3D cryptography. That's right, the obelisk itself is like one giant ancient Rubik's Cube. Depending on the angle you read from, the message could change entirely. Yes, ancient Egypt invented something like the lenticular effect long before Pokemon cards made it cool. Okay, so what in the world does the message say now? Glad you asked. These aren't just random notes from the past. They're political gold. One inscription praises Ramses II as a divine figure who could not be dethroned. Another says the king made offerings to the god Amun, which wasn't just him being nice. This was a big political move. Back then, religion and power were totally intertwined, so showing off your divine connection was like launching a PR campaign, except instead of tweets, they used 200-ton stone monuments. Ramses II wasn't just any ruler, by the way. He reigned for over 60 years and basically pulled off the Beyoncé of pharaonic careers. He won battles, or at least said he did, built cities, temples, and statues of himself all over Egypt, and declared himself a living god. When he ordered these obelisks, he wasn't just creating monuments. He was launching ancient propaganda flyers at priests, nobles, and visiting dignitaries. In fact, Ramses II was so good at self-promotion, he may as well be the original king of rebranding. He claimed victory at the Battle of Kadesh, even though it ended in a stalemate and they had the victory carved into walls and monuments across Egypt. The Luxor obelisk was another way of reinforcing his godlike powers every time someone passed by or read its text. And here's the cherry on top. Some of these inscriptions were positioned just right so they'd be seen by nobles arriving by boat for a festival. That's probably the reason why they can only be read from a certain angle. But if you stood at the base of the obelisk, you wouldn't see much. But from a 45-degree angle standing right in the middle of the Nile, sweet stuff! Imagine pulling up to a religious celebration and seeing giant stone text basically saying, "Hey, Ramses is chosen by the gods, don't forget it." Subtle? Not exactly. Effective? You bet. Some messages even carry double meanings. One line might spell out Ramses II's full royal title. But read it differently and boom, it says he's got eternal life. That's next level branding. You can almost hear him saying, "Look at me, still trending 3,000 years later." For decades, scholars thought this monument had given up all its secrets, but thanks to new access, modern tools, and some fresh eyeballs, we now know there's still a ton to uncover. Oleg Pelletier's full research hasn't been officially published yet, but the clues he's found are already shaking up what we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian monuments. Of course, not everyone's buying it just yet. Some scholars are skeptical, especially about the idea that boat-riding nobles could actually see those messages clearly. But let's be honest, ancient advertising wasn't easy. Even if your billboard is 75 feet tall, you still need the right angle and the right audience. So the next time you're in Paris staring at the obelisk while sipping your overpriced café au lait, remember, you're not just looking at a fancy paperweight from the 19th century. You're standing in front of an ancient Egyptian PR campaign, a 3D puzzle, and a 3,300-year-old flex from Ramses II himself. And let's be real, if that obelisk had been hiding messages this long, who's to say it's done talking? So grab your magnifying glass, channel your inner Egyptologist, and remember, the real treasure isn't gold or jewels, it's the drama chiseled in stone. Archaeologists recently found something fascinating from a forgotten Maya kingdom, a tomb hidden in a collapsing pyramid. Inside, there was a king buried for 1,700 years. A jade mask that looks almost human, but not quite. And all this thanks to the looters who missed it by just 6 feet. They stumbled upon it in 2022 in the dense jungles near the border of Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. In Mayan times, this little place used to be called Xochitlam. It's a lost city, half swallowed by jungle. This place meant pretty much nothing compared to other big Mayan cities, like Tikal or Teotihuacan, or so we thought. The team found a tomb of a Mayan ruler. The artifacts, the names of kings, all this revealed that Xochitlam wasn't just some tiny village. It was a pretty important place for that culture. And what they found inside that tomb may rival the treasures of any Maya metropolis. The tomb's ceiling had collapsed long ago, but the offerings were still inside and remained intact even after centuries. They recovered over 16 spondylus shells. These things were used by the ancient elite for power and rituals. That meant that whoever the tomb was related to, it was someone wealthy, of high status, who got themselves a ceremonial burial. Archaeologists also found carved femur bones. They were etched with hieroglyphs and names. Maya literally wrote their history in human remains. Researchers want to dive super deep and get a DNA analysis on the bones. Maybe that will help uncover familial ties, origins, or health problems these people might have faced. And most important of all, the mosaic jade mask. It was pieced together from luminous green tiles into an expression that feels almost human, almost alive. A lot of people were joking that it's just like Jim Carrey's mask in the famous movie. But it wasn't a magical artifact. That was the face of a forgotten Maya king, staring out at us after 1,700 years of silence. His name was etched into the femur bones, Itzam Kokaj Balam. Historians think this might be the ruler who reigned around 350 BCE. Unfortunately, this period is super underdocumented. We barely know anything about those times, but it looks like he was pretty important to the locals. One of the bones even showed a carved figure holding a deity's severed head. The deity's head looks exactly like the jade mask. Perhaps this was supposed to be the king himself, defeating some mythological villain. Other inscriptions mention the king's father and grandfather. That links Xochitlam to the mighty Maya capitals we mentioned, Tikal and Teotihuacan. Tikal was once the beating heart of the Maya world. It was a fascinating megapolis. A city rose from the Guatemalan lowlands with towering step pyramids that scraped the sky. That place was home to tens of thousands of people. It was also a hub of art, astronomy, and culture. The rulers were worshipped almost as living deities. Their deeds were carved into stelae that still stand amid the howler monkeys. Teotihuacan was located even further north. Now that was a mystery of another kind. It wasn't really Mayan, but rather Central Mexican. But still, that was a true metropolis, one of the largest cities in the world during its time. It was most famous for its Avenue of the Dead and colossal structures like the Pyramid of the Sun. It was a rich cultural center that had a worldwide influence. For centuries, both Tikal and Teotihuacan seemed to have completely different cultures. Tikal was a flourishing city-state where people loved reading, astronomy, and beautiful architecture. Teotihuacan was a titanic militaristic superpower. Two big centers of Mexico, separated by 600 miles of jungle and mountains. Compared to these imperial capitals, Xochitlam was a whisper. But it looked like this Itzam guy from the tomb wasn't just a ruler of a random village. He seemed to have political ties in ancient Mesoamerica. The craziest part is that we almost lost this piece of history, all because of the looters. At some point in the past, grave robbers had tunneled dangerously close. They stopped digging just 6.5 feet away from the tomb. That's just like in that meme with the diamonds. Sometimes you stop digging right before you hit it big. But in our case, thank heavens they didn't get there first. That's how close we came to losing a piece of history. In an almost poetic irony, it was the looters' tunnels themselves that led Estrada Belli's team to the site. Archaeologists have been looking around and using the so-called LiDAR technology. That's basically laser beams shot from high above, which help them map the spot. It's like taking X-rays of the jungle floor. And that's when they found the little signs of intrusion. They quickly realized that if someone was digging here, they were probably looking for something important. Without the failing looters, they might have walked past a discovery. In any case, archaeologists want to keep searching. They might even find more chambers buried inside the abandoned pyramid. We just keep finding mysterious things related to the Maya. Recently, buried deep within the ruins of Tikal, archaeologists found a house, and in that house, a limestone altar. It was covered in vibrant murals of red, yellow, and black. What's weird is that this build wasn't made by Maya. It was unmistakably Teotihuacan in style. And just like the tomb from before, it was made about 1,700 years ago. The altar was discovered inside a Maya-era residence known as Group 6DX7. It stood 3.5 by 6 feet right in the center of the home. That was very typical for Teotihuacan traditions. It bore a mural of the storm god. That was also a central deity in the Teotihuacan pantheon. But this altar depicted no kings and no rulers. That's very weird. As we said, Maya worshipped and honored their dynasties and political power, putting them pretty much everywhere, like some merch. But instead, this altar worshipped the deities alone, and it did so in the heart of Maya's main capital, Tikal. When archaeologists dived deeper, they saw it as unmistakable proof that Teotihuacanos not only came to Tikal, they thrived there. This house wasn't some trade outpost. People actually lived in it. Teotihuacanos built homes, practiced their rituals, and left their deities behind in this city. And Maya seemed to be chill about that. Researchers think this was a home for some elite people from Teotihuacan, or maybe it belonged to Mayans who practiced Teotihuacano culture and deeply respected it. But it might be something darker than a simple, friendly multiculturalism. The two cities weren't in the best relationship. There was some tension, maybe even surveillance. The house and the altar were probably built around 300 to 400 BCE. That was a period when Tikal was rising in power. This might have caught the attention of the mighty empire to the north. It's almost as if Mayans poked the beast. By 400 to 450 BCE, that attention may have become something sinister. The altar could have actually been the symbol of domination. Had the Maya of Tikal truly welcomed their guests, or did they come here and bluntly started building foreign altars in sacred spaces? Did Teotihuacan use this as some kind of soft invasion? In that case, it would make sense for Mayans to destroy that place or vandalize it somehow. Mayans regularly buried their buildings and rebuilt on top of them. But for some reason, this altar remained untouched. Mayans found it and buried it with the surrounding buildings as they were. No vandalism, no destruction, no rebuilding even. Looks like they had some complicated feelings about Teotihuacans. It was a time when cultures clashed, fused, overlapped, and possibly spied on each other. Perhaps one day we'll learn more about what really happened among these ancient civilizations. There's a lake in the heart of Asia that holds 1/5 of all the world's liquid freshwater. It's more than all the 5 Great Lakes have together. Even if all the rivers on our planet suddenly changed their direction and set on a mission to drain this lake, it would take them a whole year to finish the job. I'm talking about the deepest lake in the world, Lake Baikal. If you decide to go all the way down to its deepest point, prepare for a journey of almost 5,400 feet. The descent takes several hours, but the rift floor of the lake is way deeper, between 5 to 7 miles beneath the surface. It means it could be even further down than the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest known place on Earth. The amount of water it has would be enough for everyone on Earth to have something to drink for up to 50 years. This mighty giant of a lake replenishes its water completely every 383 years. Baikal has a great delivery crew of over 300 rivers and streams, bringing their waters right in. And only one river flows out of Baikal, the Angara, which is headed straight for the Arctic Ocean. Baikal isn't only the deepest, but also the oldest existing freshwater lake in the world. It formed at least 25 million years ago. It all began when the Earth's crust decided to play Tetris and created the lake and the surrounding mountains. At some point, Baikal must have been just a humble riverbed, but then tremors and fractures shook the Earth, and the distance between the shores got bigger. Water levels rose thanks to the melting glaciers. Then, several lakes formed and later merged into one. Baikal is one of around 20 lakes in the world that are older than 1 million years. And since it wasn't disturbed by glacial periods, it's a perfect research ground for scientists. Its deep-drilled core sediments can tell a lot about the climate of our planet in different periods. Since Baikal is in a rift basin with 2,000 seismic tremors per year, the lake is deepening and still growing in size. Its shores drift apart at around the same rate as South America and Africa are moving away from each other, so it has all the potential to become an ocean. Another thing Baikal has in common with the oceans is that it has water rich in oxygen, even at its lowest depths. This is one of the reasons why the fauna of the lake is so incredibly rich. It's home to over 2,500 various animals and 1,000 plant varieties. Around half of them are unique and only exist in this area, like the endemic algae, the Baikal omul fish, and the Baikal oilfish. There are also some bears, elk, and lynx living on its shores. They must appreciate the fact that the temperatures around the lake are always higher than the rest of Siberia, thanks to its huge water mass. Most Baikal dwellers prefer to stick to the bottom of the lake, but there's one brave guy you'll meet if you decide to visit. Meet the Baikal seal, also known as Nerpa. It's the only true freshwater seal in the world. Nerpa's eyes are so cute it nearly landed the part of Puss in Boots in Shrek. Nerpa in Boots sounds good to me. These huge eyes are there to help them follow their favorite pelagic fish underwater. There are other seal kinds that can handle freshwater or use it to breathe, but these cuties spend their entire lives in it. But wait, how did seals, which are supposed to be oceanic creatures, end up in a lake miles and miles away from the sea? About 400,000 years ago, during the Pleistocene era, these adventurous creatures traveled up the river and drainage systems that connected Lake Baikal to the Arctic Ocean. The ringed seal that still lives in the Arctic is believed to be the Baikal seal's closest ancestor. Today, Baikal seals are confined to their freshwater home because of the changes in waterways. And they seem to be pretty happy with their home as they can choose from a huge variety of food to eat. The seals mostly hang out in the north and central areas of the lake, but move south in the winter. The lake gets covered with ice, which they use as a chill-out zone, just like their oceanic cousins use rocks or the beach. Since at least 1969, Lake Baikal has had some mysterious ice rings pop up randomly here and there. At some point, they got so big that the astronauts even spotted them from space. The rings usually appear in late April, but can be there in January or May. Scientists couldn't crack the code on how these rings form for a while. They had all sorts of theories, and the most popular involved methane gas bubbles from the lake's depths. But then, scientists noticed that some of the rings were in shallower waters, where gas emissions don't happen. So, an international team of scientists decided to solve the mystery. They traveled to Lake Baikal, drilled holes in the ice, and dropped sensors into the water. In 2016, when they started the research, they heard that 2 vans had gotten stuck in the mysterious ice rings. Once they had analyzed the data from the sensors, it turned out that the secret behind the rings was warm eddies flowing clockwise under its ice cover. The currents were less intense in the center of the eddies, so the ice above them was thicker at the edges. The waters of the lake are so clear that you can see some extremely deep parts up to over 130 feet down. This is thanks to the surrounding mountains that send off melting ice right in. Plankton that live in the lake also helps clean the floating debris. When this crystal clear water freezes, it forms an unusually thick and see-through layer of ice. The wind likes to play sculptor on Baikal and creates one-of-a-kind pieces of art here. It picks up water, which, of course, freezes into the most unusual designs. Frozen bubbles and icicles you've never seen before. The location and geography of the lakes and the cycles of melting and refreezing create the perfect conditions for this ice workshop. And you can even see rocks that seem to be floating. The bottom of the rock freezes to the surface of the ice. Then, the strong winds wear away the surroundings, leaving a perfect pedestal for the rock. If you think the floating rocks look eerie, how about Baikal's version of the Loch Ness Monster? The local Buryat people have a legend about the water dragon master that lives in the lake. A dragon is believed to be the most powerful creature living on Earth in Asian mythology. They believe there are 4 dragons living in the 4 seas, each responsible for one of the cardinal directions. Baikal is the North Sea in this story. The image of this dragon is supposedly etched in ancient petroglyphs on the cliffs of Baikal. There's also a hefty stone slab that looks like a monument dated back to somewhere between the 3rd and the 9th century BCE, depicting a mysterious water monster. Imagine the stories this stone could tell, echoing the whispers of a bygone era and leaving us to unravel the enigma of the Baikal cliffs. The legend says that a local warrior was chasing the dragon. He finally reached the largest Baikal island of Olkhon. He was ready to face and defeat the dragon, but the beast turned into a beautiful girl, and they got married. That's one unusual twist to a classic defeat the dragon and take the girl story. So, local legends describe that dragon as a giant sturgeon with an almost gator-like snout and armored body. In reality, the mythical monster must be one of the many huge fish living in the lake. They can afford to grow to several feet in length thanks to the high levels of oxygen in the water. Beluga sturgeon can weigh several thousands of pounds, lives up to 50 or 60 years, and never stops growing.
If you ever fly over the deserts of southern Peru, you'll notice distinct white lines against the rusty red background. Look closer, and you'll see some clear shapes. Straight lines, rectangles, triangles, swirls. It seems like they're parts of huge drawings. You notice a monkey, a whale, a condor, a hummingbird, and whatnot. The lines were created more than 2,000 years ago by the people of the Nazca culture. Thanks to a dry climate and strong winds in the desert, most of the Nazca Lines are visible today. To create them, the Nazca people removed the top layer of pebbles and revealed the soil beneath the ground. The color of the soil changes from reddish-brown to yellowish-gray, so the lines always look different. It looks like the creators of the lines started with small-scale models and increased the proportions to create full-scale designs. Scientists have tried to decipher the meaning of the Nazca Lines ever since they were first discovered in the 1920s. But the first mention of the lines was actually much earlier, in the 16th century Chronicle of Peru, where they were described as trail markers in the desert. Since you can't really study the lines and their symbolism from the ground, the lines became world famous only in the 1930s with the advent of commercial planes. A decade later, American professor Paul Kosak was doing his research on the lines and noticed one interesting thing. When he looked up from the line, it was pointing directly at the setting sun. It happened one day after the winter solstice, and the scientists concluded that the lines must be the largest astronomy book in the world. German scientist Maria Reiche, who got the nickname the Lady of the Lines, supported the theory that the geoglyphs served as a calendar and had some sort of astronomical purposes. She dedicated 40 years of her life to studying the lines and swept them inch by inch. She also moved into a small house close to the lines to protect them from unwanted visitors. Then in the 1970s, American researchers called the astronomy-related theory into question. They noted that in a region like Nazca, one of the driest places on Earth with only around 20 minutes of rain per year, water is a real treasure, and the straight lines and trapezoids must have had something to do with it. They could be pointing at locations for rituals that the local people organized to obtain water and make crops more fertile. The images of animals in the Andes region are also related to water. Spiders are thought to be a sign of rain. Hummingbirds stand for fertility, and monkeys living in the Amazon symbolize an abundance of water. In more recent years, the Nazca Lines have become the research ground for archaeologists from Yamagata University. They're using high-resolution aerial photography and drones to discover and catalog geoglyphs. The team has identified a total of 358 geoglyphs so far, and 168 out of them in 2022 alone. They found images of humans, camelids, birds, orca whales, cats, and snakes, most likely created between 100 BCE and 300 CE. Some of the images are around 10 to 20 feet long, so it's no wonder no one was able to detect them before. The largest geoglyphs, by comparison, are 1,200 feet across, which is about the height of the Empire State Building. The researchers believe the Nazca Lines were used as a form of communication in the desert. The linear ones pointed the direction from valley to valley. The ones drawn on slopes seem to have been drawn along ancient pathways between settlements. The scientists now plan to find patterns in the geoglyphs depending on their distribution. They use artificial intelligence to analyze the images. The AI generates designs that are likely to be painted in the desert, and the team then checks if they're actually among the Nazca Lines. Another famous Peruvian geoglyph is a candelabra, slightly taller than the Washington Monument. You can find it on a seaside hill in the Paracas Peninsula. Researchers managed to establish the approximate age of the candelabra by analyzing the nearby artifacts. It looks like it dates back to around 200 BCE. The drawing is etched deep into the sand, and it was never meant to look like a candelabra. One theory says that the drawing was supposed to resemble the trident of an Incan deity to please it. Another popular theory is that sailors used it as a beacon for navigation. Effigy Mounds National Monument on the Mississippi River has 195 known Native American mounds. Most of them are conical in shape, and there are also several that look like birds, deer, turtles, bears, and panthers. Scientists have established that the mounds date back to around 450 BCE, and the images are somewhat younger. A study of the mounds found some copper, bone, and stone tools. The builders' descendants say that the mounds served as ceremonial sites. This story is passed down from generation to generation. Some historians believe the mounds could have been also used to mark celestial events or territories. The American Southwest and the nearby regions of Mexico have over 300 intaglios, which are giant images engraved in the ground. The most famous of them are the Blythe intaglios in California, west of the Colorado River. Blythe giants are a group of 6 figures, including that of a human being and an animal. Scientists believe the images are somewhere between 450 and 2,000 years old. According to the local Mojave tribe, there is an image of Mustamho, the creator of life. The animal figure shows a mountain lion who served as his helper. The largest figure is almost as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The creators of the intaglios had to scrape the dark rock of the desert until the lighter soil showed up. It's nearly impossible to notice them from ground level. That's why they were only discovered in the 1930s, when a pilot flying over them accidentally looked down. The best way to see the giants is still from a helicopter. Kazakhstan can boast its own Nazca Lines, a cluster of around 260 earthworks in the north of the country. The steppe geoglyphs are a variety of geometric shapes, including squares, crosses, circles, and a 3-pronged design. The creators of the images used materials such as dirt, rocks, and lumber to build them out of the ground. A local economist first spotted the geoglyphs while browsing Google Earth in 2007. Archaeologists suppose that the structures go back 8,000 years, but they still don't know who built them or why. One theory says that the lines helped track the sun's movement. NASA got interested in the discovery since the lines are much older than the ones in Peru. They took photos of the steppe geoglyphs from space, trying to solve their mystery. Another fact that makes the lines so special is how huge they are. One of the largest of them has sides as long as an aircraft carrier. The only humans who could have built them must have been the nomadic Stone Age tribes, but it's unlikely that they had such advanced tools. If they did, that would mean that archaeologists need to rethink the abilities of our long-ago ancestors. Organizing such a huge amount of people to work together on a complicated project is an amazing feat. Although the white horse on a lush green hill in Oxfordshire, England, could easily pass for modern art, it's actually one of the most ancient geoglyphs. It was created between the Bronze and Iron Ages and is the oldest chalk-cut hill figure in Britain. Whoever created it had to remove the turf to reveal the chalky white part of the soil. Scientists can only guess why this piece of art was created. It could have been a fertility symbol or a way to mark territory. Aerial images prove that the horse has changed over time because of the soil. It took several centuries to reveal a larger horse-like shape that lies under what we see now.
You're probably familiar with the saying, X marks the spot. It comes from pirate lore and adventure stories often linked with treasure maps. They may be out of fashion these days, but that doesn't stop countless antiquity hunters from searching through hills and fields daily. One such enthusiast didn't have a map with a giant X on it, but when his metal detector beeped on a sunny day in April 2025, he uncovered one of the largest buried coin hoards ever recorded. So, what kind of treasure are we talking about here, and what makes it so unique? The discovery was made by Romanian hobbyist Marius Manghia, who says he just wanted an excuse to get some exercise and fresh air. During one of those walks with his metal detector in a location 30 miles southwest of Bucharest, the device picked up a signal. As he began to dig, he found a handful of silver coins just beneath the surface. Though oxidized, they seemed remarkably well preserved. Oxidation happens when metal reacts with air or moisture over time, causing it to change color, darken, or develop a crusty surface. Just like a sliced apple darkens when exposed to air if left out too long. The pile of coins grew quickly. Soon, it was obvious they were all packed into a ceramic jar. The final count was nearly 1,500 silver denarii, Roman coins likely buried around 1,700 years ago. However, These denarii date from the reigns of emperors Nero to Marcus Aurelius, covering over a century during the Roman imperial period, which means they're almost 2,000 years old. The presence of coins from multiple emperors suggests that the wealth was accumulated over many years. The Roman money system had a bunch of different coin types, so finding only silver denarii in the stash is a bit odd. It would be like burying $15,000 in cash, but all of it $10 bills. It could mean that the original owner was a trader. Maybe he was hiding his profits during dangerous times. Perhaps it was simply someone's life savings. Depending on the emperor and the period, the value of denarius fluctuated quite a bit. So 1,500 denarii could have been either a comfortable retirement fund or not nearly enough. In the 1st century, 1 silver denarius could get you 12 loaves of bread, and if you have 5 of them, you could buy an amphora full of wine. An amphora was a large 2-handled ceramic jar used to store and transport wine, oil, or grain, and it seems to be the type of vessel in which this treasure was buried. Though amphorae were made in many different shapes and sizes, the Romans eventually standardized them as a unit of measurement, with 1 amphora being roughly equal to 7 gallons of liquid. The spot where the jar was buried wasn't tampered with. This might indicate that the hoard remained undetected all this time, but the amphora had already been broken when it was found. But why would it be broken, and what could that mean? While the exact cause of the breakage has not been explained yet, archaeologists say it may have been broken on purpose as part of a protective ritual before burial. In some ancient cultures, ritual vessels were deliberately damaged as a symbolic act. Maybe it means the jar had done its job, either as an offering to the gods or to keep someone from stealing it. You can have my silver, but I'm not giving you my precious jar. However, such rituals were not common in Roman culture, so it's a mystery for now. Perhaps it broke because the jar contained silver while being exposed to 2 millennia of soil pressure, freeze-thaw cycles, root growth, or a blind mole rat trying to find its way around. Although the amphora and its silver are now being preserved and examined by experts, their discoverer almost ended up unrewarded. After finding the hoard, he had to notify the police so they could secure the site. However, he was under pressure because in Romania, you have 72 hours to report any significant historical find. Unfortunately for Mr. Mangiak, he ran into a problem since it was a holiday and the offices he needed to contact were closed. He spent the following 2 days meticulously photographing every single coin before finally being able to present his findings to the authorities. While the exact amount of prize Mr. Mangiak might receive isn't publicly known, Romanian law typically awards 45% of a discovery's appraised value to the finder. Not a bad outcome for what started as a casual walk with a metal detector. Meanwhile, the site itself had been declared an archaeological zone, and any future digging will be done under expert supervision, which means that this story might have a follow-up one day. But for now, let's focus on what makes metal detectors beep and see if there are more hidden troves to be found around the world. Today, most hobby-grade detectors rely on something called VLF technology, where VLF stands for very low frequency. When you sweep the detector over the ground, its coil sends out an invisible magnetic field. If something metallic is within that field, for example a nail, a discarded wedding ring, or ancient Roman silver, it bounces back a signal. The device picks that up and beeps to let you know something's there. The stronger the signal, the closer or bigger the object probably is. Basically, it's using electromagnetic induction to make buried metal respond, like calling into a cave and listening for the echo coming back at you. Fun fact, bats use a similar principle to detect what's in their environment, but with sound. It's called echolocation. If you yell in a cave and disturb a bat, it might send out high-pitched clicks that bounce off objects and return as echoes, helping them pinpoint everything around them. Doesn't matter if it's a tiny insect or a pesky human in complete darkness. Metal detectors use magnetic waves. Bats use squeaks and echoes. Now, if all this got you curious about grabbing a detector yourself, what are some major locations to consider? Mr. Mangiak simply went for a walk, but for many, it's a rewarding hobby that helps history, and also pays off well. And not just in Romania, but all over the world. In the UK, regions like Norfolk, Suffolk, and Lincolnshire have become hotspots where enthusiasts regularly uncover Roman coins, Viking relics, and medieval artifacts. During the Iron Age, burying valuables was a common practice. Some researchers think it was done as a way of storing valuables. Others think it was part of a ritual. But either way, many of those hoards could still be there. France also has plenty of stuff hidden beneath the ground, including ancient Roman and Gallic treasures. In the Netherlands, someone recently uncovered a fragment of an extremely rare Viking sword. Scotland is no exception either, and findings like Peebles' hoard give additional insights into the Bronze Age. If you don't feel like venturing alone, there are organized metal detecting tours available in various countries, offering guided access to historically rich sites. That's if you're planning to search for lost relics. But what if you want to bury your own treasure chest and hide it from a metal detector? How far do you need to dig? Most hobby-grade detectors can spot a large object close to 3 feet deep. Smaller stuff like coins, just 6 to 8 inches. We also have to take into consideration that wet ground can actually boost detection. It helps signals travel better and makes buried metal easier to spot. On the other hand, professional, expensive detectors that use advanced technology can detect large metallic targets at depths of almost 100 feet, especially on a rainy day. But unless you bury your chest in a strategically important place, odds are it'll stay uncovered. Just don't forget to mark the spot on your map with an X.
You've just reached your perfect spot on a deserted beach. It's so quiet here that you start to doze off. But as you open your eyes, you are shocked. Wait a minute, is that an actual house that's just been washed up on the shore? It may sound like the beginning of a sci-fi novel, but not if you live near this beach in El Salvador. There's a mysteriously abandoned house there that looks as if it's just been washed ashore. How did this villa end up there? How long has it been here without anyone noticing it? This mysterious construction is 46 miles south of El Salvador's capital, San Salvador. Locals say the building used to be a hotel called Puerto Ventura. At the time it was built, its main attraction was the fact that it was really close to the sea. Unfortunately, the engineering behind it wasn't well planned out, all because locals didn't need any official permission to start the construction. The hotel was too close to the water and dangerously exposed to the elements. The Roman-style villa is now a mere 50 feet from the edge of the sea when the tide is low. It can only be accessed in the morning because later, the tides fill the first floor with salt water. What's now left of the hotel looks like the ruins of a 2-story house. The front part is very impressive, with Roman-type pillars. It also has wide windows on the second floor. You can still see parts of the iron structures and remains of what used to be the gateway to the second floor. There are some bleachers at the top of the building. They're sometimes used by tourists. More and more people are now browsing the area, taking photos, even though the building is obviously not safe for climbing. There's little information on how long it's been sitting in its current location, but some locals say it's been there for at least 20 years. It had remained a local secret for years before it was discovered by a TikTok user in 2021. But that doesn't answer the question. How did the hotel end up in another location altogether? This is where things become a little fuzzy. While some locals say that the building was abandoned decades ago, others claim it was deserted after Hurricane Mitch hit the area back in 1998. Hurricane Mitch was one of the most dangerous weather phenomena to ever hit Central America. During the storm, the winds traveled at 178 miles per hour, and the hurricane itself lasted for about 15 hours. It was also the cause of a huge amount of rainfall, which resulted in floods and many dangerous landslides. Being built so close to the shoreline, the former hotel had little chance of surviving the extreme weather conditions, so it must have been literally displaced. After sitting under the sun, you might start dreaming of some snowballs getting washed ashore. To even out the temperature. I'm not kidding. This strange natural phenomenon did happen back in 2016. It resulted in about 11 miles of the coast of the Gulf of Ob in West Siberia getting covered with huge snowballs. Because of the low temperatures, small pieces of ice started to form in the water. Afterward, the wind and waves rolled them into giant snowballs. Some of them were the size of a tennis ball, but others were up to 3 feet wide. A 2004 Harley-Davidson night train motorcycle popped up ashore on a British Columbia beach back in 2012. It was neatly packed inside a shipping container. It took some time to do it, but the owner was eventually traced down. His name was Ikuyo Yokoyama, and he lost his motorcycle after a tsunami struck Japan on March 11, 2011. To get to its final destination, the Harley-Davidson traveled more than 4,000 miles. To celebrate its long journey, Yokoyama donated the bike to the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee. It's been on display there ever since, in case you want to visit. This strange phenomenon made it look as if someone spilled dish soap all over the beach. But it does happen pretty often in Queensland. Sea foam covers the shore there a couple of times each year. It mostly happens after a storm, when ocean waves move dissolved organic matter around. It's basically like a giant ice cream maker. After Cyclone Debbie back in March of 2017, some beaches actually needed to be closed because of huge amounts of white foam. The wind even brought some of that foam to the nearby towns, making locals believe it was snowing. Would you be surprised to see a 6-by-6-foot rusty metal die washed ashore on your local beach? Because back in 2017, people in Coeur d'Alene in Idaho sure were. It turned out to be an old storage tank. Someone decided to spice it up a bit by adding some white spots to make it look like a die. In 1992, thousands of rubber duckies got stranded at sea after a large container ship that was transporting them was hit by a wave. As you can imagine, the ducks started popping up all over the world, in Hawaii, Alaska, South America, Australia, in Europe, and even in the Arctic. It's estimated that a couple hundred of those unlucky rubber ducks are still out there. Interestingly, they turned out to be very useful to scientists. Based on their movements, researchers can monitor the direction of water currents. If you happen to like dinosaurs, you'll be happy to know sea waters can also bring ashore some fossils. In 2018, a large dinosaur jawbone ended up on the coast of Lilstock Beach in Somerset, England. It used to belong to a dinosaur called Ichthyosaurus. Thanks to this finding, scientists were able to make an impressive discovery. Before, they thought the Ichthyosaurus could reach a maximum length of about 69 feet. But after they studied the jawbone, they ended up recalculating the creature's size. They concluded that the Ichthyosaurus could grow up to 85 feet. The megalodon was the largest predator in our planet's history. It lived almost all over the globe, except near the poles. How do we know that? Because megalodon teeth keep appearing on beaches every now and then. One staggering megalodon tooth, which was way over 20 inches long, was discovered in a river in Croatia. Since these creatures have been extinct for about 3 million years, their teeth are highly prized by fossil hunters. A giant Lego man that washed ashore is something I never thought I'd hear about. And it turns out it didn't happen just once. There were 4 of these giant Lego men in total, each around 8 feet tall. One was found in England and one in the Netherlands, while the other 2 popped up in Florida and California. It was surely not a coincidence, and after some research, people found out that a Dutch artist was behind this. Ego Leonard started this project as a personal statement campaign. A short film was even made about this, and it was called No Real Than You Are. This sentence was written on each of the 4 Lego men put to sea. A bundle of over 50 letters was washed ashore in New Jersey on a beach in Atlantic Highlands back in 2012. It happened shortly after Hurricane Sandy had struck the area. A 14-year-old boy found the letters and gave them to his mom. She was so touched by them that she decided to carefully dry and return them to their owner. The letters were the correspondence of 2 people named Dorothy and Lynn. They were dated between 1942 and 1948. The last was written a week before their wedding. With the help of an online genealogy site, the woman reached Dorothy and returned the letters to the 88-year-old woman who was living in a retirement home.
Scientists have discovered a never-before-seen pyramid immersed in the sands of Judea. After a little digging, they discovered that it held treasures that had been untouched for over 2 millennia and historical secrets that we can only now access. At the Zohar Fortress site, 2,600 feet above the Dead Sea, archaeologists were searching for manuscripts that would provide new information about the history of the site. The excavation was originally part of a long-standing campaign launched by the authorities. Its goal was to protect the sites from looting and unauthorized excavations. What they didn't expect was to find a pyramid-shaped structure built on top of a hill, made of hand-cut stones, each weighing hundreds of pounds. At first, the experts thought it was just a tomb, but they soon noticed the shape of the original walls and understood that the mound was a construction. They immediately realized that someone had dug into the top of the structure, probably looters who had spotted something valuable there. Luckily, most of the structure was still buried in sand, so the most valuable finds were hidden from sight. In the first week of excavation, volunteers found fragments of papyrus, bronze vases, and even ancient furniture, which were exceptionally well preserved. The desert climate had been a great ally in preserving those artifacts over the millennia. With little humidity in the air, mold cannot form, so organic materials such as wood and fibers are protected from cracking and deformation. Hypotheses suggested that the pyramid had been built during the First Temple period. However, new discoveries have shown that it's more recent, from the Hellenistic period. Considering this and the fact that the structure dates back 2,200 years, it's believed that it probably appeared shortly after the death of Alexander the Great, the famous ancient Greek king of Macedonia. At that time, his generals divided the former Seleucid Empire. Ptolemy took control of Egypt and the surrounding regions, including the Dead Sea area, while Seleucus took control of the north, which is now part of the Middle East. It's still not known for sure whether the pyramid was built under the rule of the Ptolemaics or the Seleucids. Both Ptolemaic coins and coins from the Seleucid kingdom have been found at the site. Even so, many scholars believe it was built when the region was under Ptolemaic control. Evidence also suggests that the building, despite its longevity, collapsed at some point. But that's not why it was abandoned by the ancient Egyptians, which begs the question of what purpose it was built for. Some believe it was used as a tomb due to its picturesque location on top of a hill. Others believed it may have served as a historical monument. However, one of the strongest theories is that the pyramid was a guard tower, protecting an important trade route along which salt and bitumen resources from the Dead Sea were transported to coastal ports. They also believe it may have been used by Ptolemaic officials to collect taxes from travelers. It would be something equivalent to our modern-day toll booths, or even port inspection agencies. Although the contents of the papyrus documents remain a mystery, it seems very likely they were written using the Greek alphabet, and some experts believe that they may have been tax documents, which would make perfect sense, given the theory that the pyramid was a guard tower. The team calls it a fascinating historical mystery that the dig is helping to unravel, but the find is just a grain of sand in an entire desert. The dig is part of a larger project that's been going on for a long time, and in the last 8 years alone, it has scanned 111 miles of desert cliffs and identified approximately 900 caves within that radius. Using rappelling equipment, advanced technology, and specialized documentation methods, archaeologists discovered thousands of rare items, such as hidden scrolls, woodworking tools, carpets, leather goods, and even treasures. For them, the Judean desert is an ancient vault just waiting to be opened to reveal its secrets. A few years before they found the mysterious pyramid, they discovered a cave that had served as a refuge for Jewish rebels almost 1,900 years ago. The site was about 262 feet from the top of a cliff, and because of its difficult access, it hadn't been explored yet. Inside, they found previously unpublished fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls that contained religious passages written in Greek. 11 lines of text were reconstructed thanks to the good condition of the papyri. So, scientists were able to identify their etymological content. Probably the best thing there was no problem with preservation. Thanks to the dry and hot conditions of the desert, the artifacts were in impeccable condition. And there were other historical treasures there. The teams found rare coins, a partially mummified skeleton over 6,000 years old, with skin, tendons, and even strands of hair. There was also a giant basket made of plant fibers, considered the oldest in the world, more than 10,000 years old. With a capacity of up to 26 gallons, it was made about 1,000 years before the invention of ceramics. Speaking of historical treasures, there's another one that has caught the attention of the scientific community. A small piece of fabric that is around 3,800 years old. But it's more than just simple fabric. Dyed with the rare scarlet paint mentioned many times in ancient religious texts, this find is the oldest known evidence of fabric painted with a dye made from insects known as scarlet worms. This is where the intense red hue comes from. It was a highly valued color, like royal blue and purple, because those insects lived in oak trees and could only be harvested for a short period during the year. So, those dyes were reserved for sacred fabrics, such as priests' clothes, marking status and religious importance. And although this discovery had great significance for archaeology, its size was actually tiny, measuring less than 1 inch. The fragment was discovered in 2016 during excavations in the so-called Cave of Skulls, but it's not known exactly how this fabric got there. According to experts, it's evidence that people knew how to dye wool fibers already 3,800 years ago or so. It also provides us with proof that the ancient textile industry already used animals at about the same time people began to create written sources. Fabrics painted using this type of dye were recorded in more recent periods. But what makes this piece really special is the fact that it is much older than any other. Another important discovery was made in 1980, when scientists found a seed that was over 1,000 years old, which turned into a mysterious tree named Sheba. They spent 14 years cultivating this plant, which is now about 10 feet tall, only to discover later that it could belong to an extinct lineage of trees that had grown in the region. The seed dates back to a period between 993 and 1202 CE, and they believe that Sheba may be a biblical tree commonly associated with healing. Although it's not been possible to identify the exact species, since the tree hasn't flowered, we know that it belongs to the genus Commiphora, which is related to famous African plants, such as the myrrh tree. But time has revealed something even more special. Its leaves and resins are rich in compounds that have medicinal, antioxidant, and even skin-soothing properties. This means that the tree may represent a forgotten lineage whose resin had medicinal value and was mentioned in ancient texts. This brings to light how ancient people dealt with botanical medicine.
So, check out this creature. What do you think this thing is? Is it a plant, an animal, or maybe even some kind of wild fungus? At first glance, this fossil could pass for any of those ancient life forms. And honestly, scientists have been scratching their heads over it for over 150 years. But now, it looks like we might finally be cracking the case on this unknown species discovery. A long time ago, during the Devonian period, plants were just starting to grow on land. The tallest trees were only a few feet high, and animals hadn't even evolved backbones yet. Back then, massive natural towers up to 26 feet tall and 3 feet wide, looking like branchless cylindrical tree trunks, were rising from the ground. Hey, what a contrast with trees back then. When scientists first discovered fossils of those towering organisms, they were totally confused, as these strange prehistoric creatures didn't look like anything they'd seen before. Some thought they were weird cone-bearing trees. Others guessed they might be underwater plants like giant seaweed or lichens, which are partnerships between fungi and algae. The mysterious objects received a name, Prototaxites. When scientists studied them up close, their internal structure reminded them of a bunch of different things. They couldn't believe a 20-foot-tall fungus or algae could be real, but that's what the fossils showed. Then most scientists decided that Prototaxites were giant fungi. But still, something didn't feel right about it. In 2007, they decided to finally get the Prototaxites mystery explained and ran a chemical test on the fossils. So they looked at the types of carbon inside them and compared them to regular plants from the same time. If Prototaxites were plants, the carbon ratios would match, but they didn't. That means Prototaxites weren't plants, and they receive carbon in a different way, not by photosynthesis, but probably more like fungi do. But then again, they look nothing like the mushrooms we know and love today. Prototaxites were giant, likely the largest living things on land at their time. And even if these strange prehistoric creatures were some fungi of their sort, then it's weird they don't have any living relatives today that would resemble them. So, if we put all this together, it looks like Prototaxites are an entirely different and previously unknown life form that didn't leave any offspring. Now, Prototaxites aren't the only unclassified organisms on Earth. About 600 million years ago, there were no fish, no sharks, no crabs. Just simple life forms like algae and bacteria drifting through calm, shallow seas. But some seriously strange creatures, completely unlike anything we see today, lived among them. They looked like underwater ferns, stood perfectly still, and absorbed nutrients straight from the water. These bizarre life forms were rangeomorphs. They ruled the oceans that were thick with nutrients back then. So rangeomorphs didn't need mouths, eyes, or muscles to survive and just soaked up whatever they needed. Some of them were as small as a finger, and others grew as tall as 6.5 feet. But as Earth entered the Cambrian period, the oceans became much more competitive. Fast-swimming creatures with limbs, eyes, and jaws showed up and ate the same food faster, and maybe even ate the rangeomorphs themselves. The chemistry of the oceans also started to shift, and the nutrient-rich waters became more like today's oceans, where food floats around in particles that active animals scoop up. So the rangeomorphs vanished forever, but scientists still find their fossils all over the world, preserved in ancient rock. They had an incredible fractal design, a pattern that repeated itself at every level, from the smallest branches to the full body. Using fossil clues, researchers built 3D computer models of what rangeomorphs looked like. They found out that these strange prehistoric creatures filled their space in a nearly perfect way. They were like optimized living sponges. But scientists still can't agree on where exactly rangeomorphs fit on the tree of life. At first, they argued over whether they were plants, animals, fungi, or something completely different. Now, most agree they were primitive animals, though they were so different that they might deserve their own unique branch, what scientists call a clade. And then there was Dickinsonia, another prehistoric creature that was so strange that scientists couldn't even agree on what it was for nearly 100 years. Some thought it was a giant single-celled amoeba. Others thought it was a type of lichen, or maybe a failed evolutionary experiment. This bizarre life form lived about 558 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, sharks, or even insects showed up. After many years of studies, Australian researchers finally got proof that Dickinsonia was an animal, and possibly the oldest one scientists have ever found. They solved the mystery thanks to really well-preserved fossil fat molecules stuck in the rock near the White Sea. These molecules were a type of cholesterol, the kind of fat found in animal cells. If cholesterol is present, it almost certainly came from an animal, sort of like animal DNA. Dickinsonia lived millions of years earlier than scientists had previously thought, and didn't look anything like modern animals. It had no head, no mouth, no arms, no legs, and definitely no organs. It was oval-shaped, like a giant pill bug or flattened jelly bean, with weird ridges running across its body. Some were tiny, but others grew up to 5 feet long, the size of a person. It didn't swim or walk, but was just lying on the seafloor, soaking up nutrients from the water or absorbing stuff through its skin. It was tricky to identify because most fossils came from high-pressure rock, where heat had destroyed all the delicate organic stuff scientists needed to study. To get to the good fossils, researchers had to rappel down 300-foot cliffs, dig out huge blocks of sandstone, throw them down, wash them, and then repeat the process. And inside one of those sandstone slabs was the fossil that changed everything. That helped finally confirm that Dickinsonia was an animal, which proves that complex animal life existed before the Cambrian diversification, where tons of new animals with bones, eyes, and limbs suddenly appeared. Scientists think the spot where they found these fossils might hold more clues about ancient life. For a long time, scientists had no clue what other group of ancient life forms slime molds were. These weird jelly-like blobs that pulse and ooze on rotten logs and forest floors aren't fungi like mushrooms, though people thought they were for years. It turns out they're more like amoebas, squishy, single-celled organisms that can move around. There are over 900 species of slime molds all over the world. You'll find them in soil, leaf litter, and especially on decaying wood. Scientists found them trapped in amber from 100 million years ago, and it looks just like modern slime molds. Scientists still know very little about how slime molds interact with other species, what role they play in ecosystems, or how they think without a brain, nerves, or a control center. But somehow, they can make decisions and adapt to their surroundings. That makes them a lot like social insects, like ants or bees, where no single bug is in charge, but the colony still works together as a smart group. Even without brains, scientists have trained slime molds to solve mazes just by responding to chemicals and learning from their environment. One way these organisms learn is through a process called habituation. It's sort of like how you get used to cold water after jumping in a lake, or stop noticing an annoying buzzing noise after a few minutes. That's your brain helping you tune out something harmless. Some slime molds can do this too. If they get in nasty conditions, like salty, dry, acidic environments or chemicals, they'll avoid them at first. But if there's food on the other side, they'll eventually get used to it and push their way through. And if you let slime mold go dormant and wake up a year later, it still remembers how to deal with salt. They even seem to be able to decide where to go based on where they found food in the past. With more and more unknown species discoveries, scientists can paint a better picture of Earth's biological past. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.